You wanna be cooler, but I made you hot. All that love that you planted now changed the plot. Extreme whether you take it for granted or not. Irreversible change, now we facing the clock. Now your tipping point is I'm missing a point. And you don't want me to leave, but I leave you no choice. Your streams are up, you're gassed up and you're changing. I'm in the dark and you're trying to save me.
Can't you see that I love you and I care? This a long-term thing, not a short affair. Was cold green, now it's cold red. Unequivocal proof, no time to spare. I'll still be here when you're long gone, but I want it to work, so I give you my all. I know you're scared, but I'm not your enemy. Open your eyes. There's remedy in my sorrow, where you choose to rest your gaze. Wish I could love, wish I could touch you in the right ways. Wish we could cry, wish we could try in the right ways. 'Cause we all share the same heaven, underneath the same stars. We all share the same heaven, desire to exchange ours. We all share the same.
I'm thinking green and you're thinking
Green, you ain't changing. I've been thinking deeds and you thinking
green.
you ain't changing. Global warming of our hearts for humanity. You ain't changing.
So the medicine starts with me. Yo, so here's my proposal.
We need to be committed.
This engagement will be global. We need more peace.
And we don't need beef.
Problems could be solutions.
We recycle and repeat.
We need less flying.
We need less
And
buying.
everything's on Amazon.
But the Amazon is dying.
We have all we need.
Even a Cardi B.
But we need to offset. There is no plan B. So let's be Migos.
But people over diesel.
Eco over ego.
Equal over evil.
Cause we all stars in this life, no sequel. And this our last shot.
See them coming with the needles.
Got college PhDs, but they sounded so ignorant.
They should know 2 degrees makes a huge difference. So
Use your eyes,
listen to the signs.
cause this is man-made.
Then we need mankind. Let the earth capsize to a heart that transcends.
Together like Pangea, we could do it again. History proves humans have always been profound. Once the earth keeps spinning, we can turn this around.
Good morning, everyone, and also a good morning to those of you who are watching us online. This is actually the third Bright Green Summit hosted by the US Chamber of Commerce here in Stockholm, and our host is Peter Dahlén. I am Viveka Hirdman-Ryrberg, and I am here as one of your moderators together with Peter today. And I'm here, I've been asked to do this moderating, co-moderating, as I also chair MISUM at the Stockholm School of Economics. MISUM is the Mistra Institute for Sustainable Markets. It's a research center well into its second 5-year period. Of course, we want to thank you for joining us today, either it be online or in person. And actually, so you saw this beautiful little introductory film, and there is also you can watch a metaverse of the Bright Green Summit. I think you all agree with me and Peter that we are at a tipping point in terms of addressing climate change. And I also think you can agree with me that we have to accelerate, take action, collaborate more, and really get going at a much faster speed than up until now. This is what this day is about. And when we bring people together, it's also because people know different things. And by collaborating, meeting, you get new insights. And hopefully after this day, you will get back and also accelerate your work in terms of fighting climate change. Before I hand over to Peter, just a few housekeeping. Should we need to evacuate this where we are, there are emergency exits up there and also down here. During break and lunch, you just walk, or when there will be time for break and lunch, you just walk down there and there will be coffee served during the break and so on, and also lunch out there. And should you want to acknowledge the Bright Green Summit in social media, use the hashtag Bright Green Summit. By that, Peter, I hand over to you.
Great. Thank you, Viveka. So, as Viveka said, I'm Peter Dahl, the Managing Director of the American Chamber of Commerce in Sweden, or AmCham. We are the home of American business in Sweden and the only trade association in Sweden that's dedicated to U.S.-Swedish trade and investment. And so the discussions today at what is our third Bright Green Summit, we're going to highlight the need for coordination and cooperation across industries, governments, academia, and the public and private sector, and society as a whole, to provide the education, public policies, products and services, and education, repeating education because it's actually so important, and across all areas of public policy, and that are necessary to combat climate change. As Viveka mentioned, we are at a tipping point, and some of our speakers and panelists on stage today will be able to provide the unique insights from the negotiations at COP28 in December, as well as from discussions last week at the World Economic Forum in Davos. But there's no doubt that that an all-hands-on-deck approach is needed from each and every one of us. But now, and it's my great honor to welcome U.S. Ambassador to Sweden, Erik Ramanathan, to the stage to kick off this year's Bright Green Summit. Ambassador Ramanathan has served as ambassador to Sweden since January of 2022, so we're at the 2-year mark now. And it's been a wonderful 2 years with Ambassador Ramanathan here as the top U.S. official in Sweden. And prior to his appointment here, he was chairman of the board of Heluna Health, a trailblazing public health nonprofit serving more than 80 million Americans with over 500 programs addressing population health and community resilience issues. Also in his background, he was the executive director of the Harvard Law School Center on the Legal Profession and served as the board chair at Immigration Equity, and has long demonstrated a passionate interest in helping others and those who may need help in expressing their voice. Over the past 2 years, Ambassador Ramanathan has proven to be a true champion of strengthening the long-standing and strong ties between Sweden and the United States, and we're grateful for his presence here today. And with that, I'll turn the podium over to Ambassador Ramanathan. Mr. Ambassador, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Is that on now? Are we on? Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. There are several American companies currently developing SMRs of various sizes using different coolants. And some of them will even have the potential to use spent nuclear fuel, which would address another environmental issue. One of the key pieces of legislation in our commitment for green transition is the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, the largest climate and clean energy-related investment in American history. And it's a key piece of the president's agenda to mobilize private capital through a combination of innovative tax incentives, grant programs, and loan guarantees, around $360 billion over a decade. And at its core, the law works by incentivizing private investment in renewable energy and climate-resilient infrastructure, and leveraging the vast combined funding to reduce carbon emissions and promote sustainable practices. It's a duly enacted law, not a collection of executive actions, and it is here to stay. IRA's provisions incentivize technologies across the clean energy supply chain, including solar, wind, geothermal, hydrogen, critical minerals and battery technologies, tidal and wave energy, carbon capture and sequestration, and nuclear power. It allows us to think more ambitiously about building a clean energy economy and helps us secure the capital to make it happen. We can catalyze new industries like clean hydrogen while accelerating the development of existing industries like wind and solar power generation. Since President Biden signed IRA into law only 16 months ago, companies have already invested more than $240 billion in new clean energy projects. The US is on track, for instance, to triple its installed wind power by 2030. Meanwhile, over $85 billion has gone into battery manufacturing, and the US share of global battery manufacturing capacity is projected to almost double by 2030. Enough capacity to meet our entire domestic demand for electric vehicle batteries. Together, these investments have already created more than 170,000 jobs, and the law is projected to create more than 1.5 million additional jobs over the next decade. Now, IRA is just one piece of legislation. It complements the CHIPS and Science Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, both passed earlier in 2022, which together provide about $150 billion more for green technology research, training and retraining, and infrastructure, including things like a national network of EV chargers. Together, these three laws lay the foundation for the US to be the home for rapid technological innovation and scale-up that the world needs to transition to clean energy. And to also form the bedrock of long-term energy security for the US and its allies and partners. Attracting foreign direct investment from investors and businesses around the world, including Sweden, plays a really key role in fulfilling the goals of IRA and its sister legislation, which provide an abundance of opportunities for foreign companies across all the incentivized technology categories. While direct attribution is imprecise, it cannot be a coincidence that the first full year in which IRA was in effect saw a near doubling of trade investment with green tech pioneer Sweden, from $30 billion to more than $51 billion in 1 year. And in the 2 years that these three sister laws have been in play, Sweden has moved from the 14th largest foreign direct investor in the US to 10th. Really impressive for a nation of just over 10 million people. Select USA, the U.S. government-wide initiative to attract and retain investment in the U.S. economy, can deliver information, data, counseling, and other services directly to potential and expanding business investors who want to follow in these footsteps. IRA's focus on transitioning away from fossil fuels and reducing carbon emissions also aligns with the EU's Green Deal, laying the groundwork for transatlantic collaborations in green tech, renewable energy, and sustainable energy-efficient solutions. While our toolbox for spurring private sector action may be different, we work in close coordination with the EU to take practical steps towards aligning our approaches, strengthening and securing supply chains, manufacturing, and innovation on both sides of the Atlantic. The US-EU task force on IRA works diligently, for example, to pave the way for diversifying critical mineral and battery supply chains, recognizing that we need to build out these supply chains in a strong, secure, and resilient manner, consistent with our shared values, even if our clean energy economies are not identical. The final point I want to make about IRA is its focus on advancing equity. The Biden administration takes very seriously the imperative ensuring that the green transition is a just transition that benefits all sectors of society. And designed with this in mind, many of the IRA's tax credits are tiered. For example, a company will receive more credits if it invests in a brownfield location, which corrects for less responsible environmental protections in previous waves of industrialization. The company gets even more benefits if it pays living wages and provides meaningful job training or retraining, which helps to create lasting prosperity in local communities. With such incentives, IRA is helping to reimagine future industries and supply chains by turning the climate crisis into an opportunity and solidifying the commitment to moving America to a clean energy future with concrete actions. The U.S. will have the resources to meet the climate change challenge together with our partners. I also wanted to highlight one more recent initiative that reaches beyond our transatlantic region, and that is the Energy Transition Accelerator, or ETA, an innovative carbon finance platform aimed at catalyzing, again, private capital to support ambitious, just energy transitions strategies in developing and emerging economies. The core framework for the platform was announced during COP28, and the governments of Chile, the Dominican Republic, and Nigeria announced that they would be joining ETA as pilot countries. ETA will bring together governments and private sector stakeholders, employing high integrity carbon crediting to deliver faster, deeper greenhouse gas reductions. By accelerating the transition from fossil fuels to clean power in developing emerging economies. Based on preliminary estimates, ETA could mobilize somewhere between $72 and $207 billion in transition financing by 2035. That's a huge step in the global effort. It's still an initiative that is a work in progress, and it will evolve as it grows, but it is enormous compared to what has already been done. Combined with likely cost reductions in green technology implementation and related equipment that should come from green tech scale up in the US and in Europe, this kind of initiative should really help us ensure that adoption of green technology and benefit from sustainability is truly global. Because no country, business sector, or corporation can defeat climate change problems on its own. We need strong partnerships to get the job done. Governments, industries, and academia all have to pitch in and lend their support. Every nation has a role. And I can't emphasize enough how important public-private partnerships will be to solving one of the greatest challenges of our generation. If we make our collaboration on this critical issue even more robust, and at the same time stay true to our values, like respect for science, human rights, and inclusive opportunity, we will move steadily towards a cleaner future. I'd like to extend a big thank you to AmCham for organizing this Bright Green Summit. And each year it's such a timely and relevant event. So I hope you all have a great day. Apologize for my mic difficulties. And please keep the conversation going throughout the day.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Ramanathan. It is impressive how the US is really accelerating. And before I would like to invite my fellow panelists here, I just want to underline that this is also a day where we have representatives from different parts of society here. You are policymakers or work in the government agencies. You are scientists in different, representing academia. You work in different companies, i.e. the business community. And probably, or not only probably, but it will take all of us to work and find new solutions to combating climate change. And this is also why I would like to welcome my panel now. And we have Mattias Frumerie, who is the climate ambassador at the Ministry for Climate and Enterprise in Sweden. Welcome, Mattias. Why don't you take a chair? And I would say you are the chefsförhandlare, chief negotiator for Sweden when it comes to these COP meetings. We also have Emilia Hagberg, Vice President of Sustainability Development at Skanska. Welcome, Emilia. And we have Robert Watt, the Communications Director and Head of Strategic Policy Engagement at the Stockholm Environmental Institute. So we have government policymaker representing that. We have the business and we have science with us here. You were all in Dubai at the COP28. You have all been at different COP meetings through the years in your different capacities. And as you all probably know, but just to remind us all, what came out of Dubai was quite a lot, in a sense. And even though it was a day late and you probably had no sleep and so on, Mattias, there was a resolution that came out. And just to summarize a few points of that came out, it was actually the first time ever that there was included a line on transitioning away from fossil fuels in the resolution. It included commitment to triple global renewable energy capacity and global energy efficiency by 2030, and to accelerate the development of low-emission technologies. And also, steps were taken to secure a just transition, for example, a fund for financing loss and damages, and of course, much, much more. But you are the experts, and let me ask you all to start to kick off this panel, what your key impressions were from Dubai, if you were sort of did more than you had expected actually come out, or were you a bit disappointed? What stood out, Mattias, would you say, in your estimation?
First of all, thanks so much for inviting me here. And I think one of the more memorable moments, I think, actually was where Rob was present as well, when we had a joint event together with India and the Indian Prime Minister, where we had, was it like 500 Indian colleagues who were basically sort of cheering Prime Minister Modi to the stage. So, I mean, that was quite the memorable event in itself, sort of also walking with the Prime Ministers towards the stage. I mean, that was, it was quite impressive. But man, in terms of the outcome, outcome as such. I think the points which you highlighted, I mean, the first time that we mentioned all fossil fuels in the actual outcome text, I mean, we had an outcome in Glasgow 2 years ago where we said that we would be phasing down the use of unabated coal, so that was the first step, but now we could build on that to ensure that we had the transition away from fossil fuels and energy systems. Of course, there's no timeline to this. There's no sort of division of labor, who does what first, and so forth. So that's something which I hope that we can be working together with EU colleagues now to ensure that there is some kind of more concrete steps to be taken in terms of how this transition away will actually be done. Another issue I'd like to highlight, which is sort of part of the same decision on the global stocktake, as it was called, where there was a call to all parties to come forward with new nationally determined contributions, or the national climate plans, which we all do, by COP30, so not this year, but next year, which then follows also on this 5-year cycle for the nationally determined contributions. And I mean, this is already part of the Paris Agreement, so in a sense, it was not necessary to have it there, but it was important to have that kind of signal to all countries to come forward with these new, more ambitious NDCs, and pointing specifically to the fact that they need to be economy-wide, so cover all sectors of the economy. They need to cover all gases, methane, and so forth, and they need to represent the progression in terms of emission reductions in relation to the previous NDCs. So we have a clear guidance there as well in terms of what countries need to do. So that's also something for us within the EU, together with partners, to ensure now how can we support and encourage countries to come forward with these more ambitious NDCs ahead of COP30 next year.
And disappointments?
Well, I mean, where do we start? No, I think there are disappointments in terms that we could not get this more sort of concrete timelines. I mean, there are a couple of mentions in terms of what needs to be done by 2035 and 2040 in relation to what science tells us. But it could be even more specific. And I think from our side also, I mean, which also relates to what we're discussing here, I mean, what we would have wanted to see is more of an embracement of the opportunities that the transition brings in terms of new jobs and growth. I mean, we're taking those kind of steps, but I think it would have been useful maybe to embrace that even more strongly, which, in our view at least, would incentivize and encourage countries, all different types of countries, to be even more ambitious when we all can see the kind of jobs and growth that the transition actually brings.
Final question, not your final question, but final question for now. Did you have fewer or more sleepless working nights during this COP compared to previous COPs you have attended?
I think personally it was actually less sleepless nights, but for others I think there were more sleepless nights. So yeah, I guess it evens out in the end.
Thank you, Emilia. You were there representing Skanska, maybe with some colleagues from Skanska. Your takeaways, sort of what came out maybe better, and were you disappointed or not disappointed?
Firstly, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I think that you can put it good COP or bad COP, how you see it. I think one perspective is that I didn't have that high expectations on the final result, on the negotiations. I mean, the discussions in advance about the hosting country and the leader of the COP as such. But I totally agree with Mattias and what you presented, that the fossil fuels were mentioned. I mean, that is a success, even though you can always think it could be even more ambitious. On the other side, of course, if you could wish for more concrete amounts or timelines, or there are still a lot of loose threads. But for us, as a construction and development company, what is really the change now since a couple of years, and what is really demonstrated on this, is a recognition of the built environment as a very important sector for this transition. built environment stands for about 40% of the energy-related global emissions. So of course, that is very, very important. And we have been participating in preparing for an initiative that was launched, Buildings Breakthrough. That was about 20 or 28 or 30 countries that was supporting about near zero buildings 2030, that should be the norm. And that is really, really a step forward. So overall, I think it was a really good result, and I'm the one that looks at things from the half-full glass perspective.
And why is it important for companies, do you believe, to actually be present at the COP meeting? It's huge. I read somewhere 85,000 participants. So it's like, ooh. So why do you decide to go to a COP meeting as a company?
It's a really good question, and we always think through: is it beneficial for us, and also for the overall interest? The reason for why we went to Dubai this year are, I would say, three. Firstly, a lot of organizations and other actors in our network, they actually meet at COP. That's going to be a meeting place, and if you are participating and doing a lot of work together, that's the place to be, because that is kind of the global meeting place once a year. So that is one important reason. Another is that we really want to support the politicians by saying, like, if you keep on, if you raise the bar, we will deliver, and to meet other companies that has the same message. And specifically, we want to have a dialogue with other organizations in our supply chain, but also politicians, to say, we think the public procurement is a very, very important driver for this transition, especially in the built environment. So these are three of the most important reasons.
Now turning to research or science, also, of course, critical for combating climate change. And you have also participated at a number of COP meetings. What stood out in Dubai, do you think? And were you disappointed?
Thanks very much, Viveka. So I have two positive things that stood out for me, and two negatives as well. So on the positive side, actually, I think that you mentioned the tripling of renewable energy. That's also matched by a doubling of energy efficiency. And what's interesting about that is not only that we found those in the text, that was long predicted to be the case, but that we set some rather more near-term deadlines for reaching that of 2030. And I think that having a near-term deadline agreed at a COP meeting by leaders is a significant step forward. That's really positive. And we're not talking about 2050 somewhere in the distant future. We're talking about things that you can almost hold leaders around today to account for. So that's, I think, the first thing. We're talking in terms of near-term action that's required. The second is that some of that was at least backed up, and it was backed up by some money. So $5 billion, I think, put on the table for the tripling of renewable energy. Backed up also by some partnerships. Mattias mentioned the partnership between India and Sweden to accelerate the transition of heavy industries, steel and cement sectors responsible for large amounts of emissions and always traditionally felt to be very difficult to deal with. So I think that it's a combination of some near-term action with deadlines and some actual proper backup to the implementation of that with money and with partnerships. So those are the positive sides. But I'll come to the negatives. Shall I come to the negatives already? Yeah, okay. Okay. So, yes, this was the first time a UN conference acknowledge the science that we all know, which is that fossil fuels are the main cause of climate change. Great to have it in the text. Transitioning away, I felt was less than second best. We need to be talking in terms of a phase out. From the point of view of science, just before the COP, my organisation, Stockholm Environment Institute, together with the United Nations Environment Programme, released a report called the Production Gap Report, which set out the case and the need to reduce the production of fossil fuels. The numbers are there. And we know that also the planned production is way beyond what is in line with NDCs, let alone with 1.5 degrees. So the science is there. The text did not match, I think, at this stage, what the science is there. Now, obviously, it was the best that could be obtained. It was great to have fossil fuels in there. But you look at the reaction of the markets immediately afterwards, and they said, we don't believe this language is going to be the thing that really reduces it. The price of emission credits went down the day afterwards. So that's a big negative. The other negative is actually really important and doesn't get talked about too much, which is I don't think there was enough focus on adaptation. There was some great stuff about finance for mitigation and replenishing the green climate fund and things like that, but adaptation is going to be increasingly important, and it feels a poor cousin in these discussions. Thanks.
And talking about adaptation, again, as you represent different stakeholders, if I can call you stakeholders, how do you, has your way of collaborating or interacting, maybe I should use more than the word of collaboration, has that changed over the years? Do you, ahead of a COP meeting, for example, Mattias, do you meet with different companies? Do you meet with researchers, and vice versa?
Well, I think from our side, we try to engage as much as we can in these different types of partnerships, both sort of within Sweden, but also, of course, with partners outside. Both, our main arena when it comes to negotiations is actually within the EU. Since we negotiate, the EU negotiates as a group. Of course, when I and the team try to ensure that there is sort of a Swedish perspective that is mainly within the EU, so the EU in turn can be making that voice heard on the global stage. But I think when it comes to the partnerships, again, what Emilia was highlighting as well, why the companies are there, and I'm glad to hear that it's of significance for the business itself. But for us, of course, it's hugely important to be able to point to the Swedish pavilion and all the business actors which are there and can provide the solutions. Because again, I think, as Rob was rightly saying, we're so far behind, and obviously the text even from COP28, even though a step forward, doesn't go far enough. We're lagging massively when it comes to emission reductions. We're lagging when it comes to adaptation. We're lagging when it comes to finance as well. So whatever we can do from various types of Swedish actors to encourage and incentivize our global partners to do more, and we need to do that jointly, and that's why it's so incredibly useful for us to build on this dialogue with Swedish business actors, so we can be supporting each other together also with Swedish academic institutions to highlight, what the science says. So we have such a strong case, I believe, at least from the Swedish side, in terms of showing how things can be done. Of course, we can be seen as pretentious. We're far up in the right-hand corner saying, this is what we've done. But I think, to some point, I'm willing to take that risk in a way, to be perceived as naive and saying, this is what we can do. And of course, when we talk to colleagues from the Pacific Islands or Caribbean states, highlighting the opportunities in the transition, about the jobs and growth that I was talking about, and they say, well, for in our case, we have to move. I think there are 2 Pacific states who recently entered into agreements with Australia in terms of relocation. because there's no place for them to stay on their islands. So obviously, I mean, the realities are very different depending on where you are in the world. But I think for the majority of countries, what we can do is, to engage in that kind of dialogue together with partners in Sweden in terms of, how can we accelerate with the kind of solutions that we have available.
And for Skanska, how do you, because you're a global company, and so Sweden's stance is one part, and you're part of the Swedish pavilion and so on. And how do you sort of interact both on a global scale and also in the Swedish context and in the US context, of course?
Yeah, I think that we have in Sweden a great cooperation with the government in the preparation, and we are aligning messages together in the business that are going to the COP, which is great, and we participating in the Swedish pavilion and events that is done there. I think that is a really, really good way to do it. On a global level, as you say, we have a broad footprint. We participate in global networks for sustainability that organizes business, and that is a very, very good arena for us. And I mentioned before the buildings breakthrough. That initiative was led by or hosted by France government and Morocco, and that will now be followed up in the first ever high-level ministerial level meeting focusing on the built environment in Paris in the beginning of March. And we have been part of that work for a year or more about focusing on the market transition and how that kind of can be released to do the transition. And that is a true collaboration with the politicians and the business and other parts in the value chain.
Is it, from a scientific or a research perspective, is this type of partnerships and collaboration, is it impactful? Does it lead to any results?
Yes, I want to bang the drum a little bit for these sorts of multilateral forums. I think the first COP I attended was back in 2008. It was like COP 14 or something like that. And you look at the design of the UNFCCC, where it has a very clear link to science through the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And I think that link, if you look over time, back from 2008 to where we are now, has actually had an impact. The new science has come in, science around how to achieve 1.5, how to get to net zero, has meant that we've gone from a discussion negotiating some climate issue back in 2008 and negotiating texts and agreements to actually then becoming more like a forum for discussing how do we implement it, how do we get the full economy, the whole of society approach to deliver. And that's why we have 85,000 people in attendance. It becomes something of a, it's more than just a trade fair. It's really where we're beginning to discuss what the future of our economies and societies will look like. And that has very much been informed by the science from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Yes, it drips in and it comes in over time. So I think that, yes, it's effective when it comes within that multilateral framework. So that's really important and very important to bear in mind in an era where, or in a time where there is a lot of geopolitical tension. Then the other side is, what about the impact in the real economy with companies such as Skanska? And I think that what is very evident is that they are beginning to take on board the science. They're being given tools, sometimes regulations and requirements to report, and they're producing some of the solutions. And I think that we see companies going, some companies at least, being front runners. And the problem is that we've still got some laggards, and quite a lot of them, and we're stuck in that fossil economy still.
Mattias, you want to come in?
Just maybe to add on this, sort of collaboration side of things as well, because what we've been seeing just in the past couple of years is quite an increase in various types of global partnerships between both countries and companies, which complement the negotiations. I mean, many within the UNFCCC process are saying that we're done with negotiations. We have the Paris Agreement, we have the Paris Rule, but we know what to do. So what we need to focus on now is, of course, implementation. We don't need to set sort of new targets in terms of we have the 1.5-degree target, we have adaptation targets and finance targets. So we need to focus on the implementation, and a way to do that is also then to work within these global partnerships. I mean, I think the buildings breakthroughs is part of a wider group of breakthroughs. I think there are now 6 of them, steel, hydrogen, energy transition, road transport, buildings, and cement. And I think that's also a good example of how policymakers get together in terms of highlighting what are good policy options to sort of drive the transition within these various sectors, which in turn then is also complemented by yet another initiative which President Biden launched at COP26 called the First Movers Coalition, which sort of takes the policy, builds on the policy action and encourages companies to make basically purchase commitments, saying, okay, by 2030, 20% of the cement we buy will be green, or 30% of the steel we buy will be a green steel. So we're having these sort of actions within the value chain from the policy side to the business side within these various initiatives. And we, from the Swedish side, I think we're now part of some 70 international initiatives, which themselves are,
It sounds a bit complex, sort of how.
Well, in a way it is. But that's, of course, but I think also speaks to the importance of these partnerships, to use all the various platforms we can to, push for more action.
So I gather you are optimistic then. Emilia, you wanted to come in.
Another comment on the cooperation side. I mean, it is complex. There are different views. And I also think it's important to recognize that there are different roles, you can say, or you are in different arenas. I mean, business, you have to do profit. You are in a market. So it's all about the open up the market potentials and identify what are the obstacles. So that's one perspective. We need science. We need academia to feed into that. Of course, that's not our role. We need to adapt to that, and we have the policymakers to open up if there are obstacles that can be opened up by the policymakers. Not some things need to be done within just the business sector. So there are different roles, and we need to identify this. So it's not just we are sitting together and trying to just talk. We need to identify what can each party do in this ecosystem.
Robert.
Yes. I wanted to describe a couple of important areas where I think that partnership is necessary but insufficient on its own. And I think the first of those is that we need to go beyond partnership to think about those forums that also need to be placing climate and sustainable development. We need to think beyond just climate, of course, biodiversity, pollution, and those things such as the World Trade Organization and other key rule-setting forums. And I think that it's not just partnership, it's actually about reorienting. Another one would then be the sort of international financial institutions as well. And yes, there are beginning to be some steps in that direction, but that's more than just partnership. The second area where where partnership is necessary but not sufficient is we talk a lot about how, and it's evident, there is greater inclusivity of the real economy in these UNFCCC forums. But inclusivity is not equality. And I think that we do need to then begin to think a little bit about, okay, how do we make sure that we are addressing the fact that there are significant inequalities that are also both caused by, but also drivers of some of these pollution, biodiversity loss, and indeed climate change as well.
The World Economic Forum and Davos was mentioned previously, and you've probably seen their global risk report, and they have a 2-year perspective and a 10-year perspective. And when you look at the 10-year perspective of the top 10 risks, actually 4 of them are related to climate, environment, pollution. And the very, very top risk highlighted is extreme weather. And this is in a 10-year perspective. In a 2-year perspective, this top risk was misinformation, actually, followed by extreme weather. And a 10-year perspective, that is 2034. We are beyond 2030 by then. And and we have these different commitments. First, they were sort of set out for 2050, and now the importance of actually getting to action 2030, as you are also highlighting. And then at the same time, we have a new COP soon coming up, and then another COP, and so on. Do the COP meetings have they sort of played out their role, or will they be fruitful going forward, considering all these major risks, considering the burning platform we are on to? What will happen, actually? What do you think? I don't know who wants to start.
I think that is Mattias can answer first.
I think, it's encouraging to see, I think, that this kind of conversation is taking place. How do we make best use of the COP meetings themselves? I mean, as you said, the COP28 was huge, 85,000 participants. I don't think COP29 will be as big, and of course, you could reflect on the fact: is it useful to have all these people there, not just because of the carbon footprint as one, the impact on that, but at least this is the process we have. So from we're building an international consensus in terms of how we should be working on tackling climate change. And the urgency, in my mind, also doesn't really give us time to build another kind of process. So let's use what we have, because building a new process is going to take a number of years. It's going to take us to 2034. So let's focus on what we have. Let's make the best of that. And it is a slow process, but I think also the results that we got out from COP28 shows us that once we the better we mobilize within the EU, together with the US and other global partners, with civil society organizations, with academia, with business, we can get tangible results. And again, I think that comes back also to the kind of approach that we want to take, be as engaged as we can in various types of international conversations. I think the points which Rob made on the World Trade Organizations, the World Bank, the international financial system, also financial markets more generally, how do we ensure that finance is being directed towards green investments? In many cases, I would say, for developing countries or for countries globally, climate and development is so intrinsically linked. You can't have successful climate action without development more generally. What is needed for effective climate action in terms of freedom from corruption, functioning institutions, a regulatory setup which attracts the kind of investment necessary, or more or less the same kind of issues you would need for development more generally as well. So can we use the urgency of climate action in terms of the emissions reductions we have to make also as a driver for these sort of wider development gains? We're set up for a win-win future. And again, I think that the title of our meeting here today, it can be a bright green future if we all set ourselves to take on the kind of leadership we all need, or we can do, in our various types of roles. The kind of roles that we have, everyone here in the audience. What can I do in terms of, from my perspective, and in the kind of professional and role that I have, it is definitely possible to make also the COP meetings deliver the kind of results that we need.
Do you have any opinion if sort of our policymakers in the driving seat, or is the business community in the driving seat, or is it research in the driving seat? What do you think, Emilia, in terms of accelerating, taking action, reaching results?
It's a really good question, because if you are in the business as I am, I hear a lot of people saying it's actually the companies that are now driving, the politicians are a bit behind. I also have my background within politics, And that was not exactly the same view. And my view is that you need both. The actions will need to happen within companies. I mean, that's where the emissions are, and that's what you need to reduce. That's a fact. But it needs a support, a framework that is based on policy that kind of helps that transition. And that is, so, I mean, you can't say it's one or the other. And I think that you referred to the risk report from World Economic Forum. That's based on a survey questions from CEOs. So that is what they see from a business perspective. And I don't think that it differs a lot between, maybe not from us, what we see as risks the coming years. So that means that it's a business risks, and that is also the risk for the humanity. So it comes together, and that is so that what could be more of a different views before, it's coming together, and I think that's very hopeful that we will kind of work the same direction, because business and the climate risks and the science, as I see it, comes together.
Are you of another opinion?
No, but I wanted to take a different metaphor than the driving seat, actually, because I think we should be thinking about how we design a really efficient tandem bicycle for business and policy, in that case, to pedal together. And certainly, I think research and science can help to make sure that design works well, is supplied with the right set of information, the right gears, if you like, on that bicycle. But I also wanted to come back to the global risk report and reflect on the fact that this last year was the hottest year on record. This year, we might expect those records again to be broken as the effects of El Niño sort of hang over into this year. And we may well see temperatures globally going beyond 1.5 degrees as a global average. And I just want to say that doesn't mean that the Paris Agreement isn't working. It means it sends a very clear signal that we need to double down on our efforts, and we need to move, and this I think is where some of the science will be probably trying to provide, again, more information, is around the fact that it is not only important and critical that it matters that every fraction of a degree that we can stay under 1.5 or 2 degrees matters, but it's also every month, week, day that we can avoid overshooting that 1.5 degree also really matters, and describe why that matters and how to avoid it. And I think that that's something that we can expect, and hopefully that begins to answer some of the worries that people have about this 10-year perspective of extreme weather events.
We just have a few more minutes now, and I want to ask all three of you, forward-looking, are you, either as individuals, but rather as what you sort of the organization or the what you represent, are you taking any specific actions now in a one-year perspective in order to accelerate? What is sort of, when you go back to your daily grind, what's actually happening? Sort of what is there anything that's different now compared to a few years ago? Specific action, Mattias.
Maybe then on three levels. I mean, first on a national level, the government just presented their climate policy action plan with a number of sort of actions set out for the 4-year period in office, but that's all including actions for this year. On the EU level, we'll be having a communication from the Commission in just a couple of weeks on the new 2040 target, which then will be negotiated and eventually handed in to the UNFCCC as the EU's new NDC within the next year or so, ahead of COP30. And then on a global scale, again, coming back to implementation of the commitments on COP28, how do we set a more sort of clear timeline in terms of the transition away? How can we be supporting countries and partners globally in terms of making that actually happen, including in terms of the new NDCs to be presented ahead of COP30?
Thank you. Emilia for Skanska.
Yes, I mean, there has been a shift from more, you can say, fluffy targets to an expectation of actions and to showing results. And from our perspective, you can say in the coming year, we will continue work with others about setting standards and the same view on, for instance, what is a net zero building? I mean, that is something that is needed to make sure that we know what we are talking about. Internally, we are analyzing our climate plan. Is it efficient? Are we doing the right things? Is that cost efficient? Is that really supporting our customers and ourselves in a cost efficient way? And also we are focusing on scaling up things that we are doing. We have really great buildings, we have products, but how can we have that in all our markets and use the knowledge? I mean, we are so diverse. So I mean, for instance, low carbon concrete. We know that has to grow, and so we have focus on several areas to scale up. I think these are 3 very important actions.
And Stockholm Environmental Institute?
Yes.
Actions being taken now.
We're actually just writing our new 5-year strategy, and that will focus on implementation. So I think that is actually the big shift for us. 3 very quick examples. First of all, we'll be continuing to support and work with a number of industry transition partnerships, India, Sweden, UK, Brazil, hopefully expand that to other parts of the world as well to decarbonize those hard-to-abate sectors. Second example is critical raw materials that are going to be crucial to the net zero transition, making sure that we obtain them or that we can use them and reuse them in a way that is sustainable. Third example is really what we call moving from the billions to the millions. Actually, how do we finance these projects on the ground? Yes, it's great having 5 billion for tripling renewables, but you actually need to spend millions on the ground, and there are often real bottlenecks in making that happen.
Thank you. 3 great actions or descriptions of actions and acceleration. And I would urge all of you, when you go back, and also think what you and your organization is, how you are accelerating. And also if you should start new partnerships or new collaborations. I would like to thank all 3 of you: Mattias Frumerie, Sweden's Climate Ambassador, Emilia Hagberg, Vice President at Skanska for Sustainable Development, and Robert Watts from the Stockholm Environmental Institute. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
You, Viveka, Emilia, Mattias, and Robert. I think there was a lot to take away from that discussion. I think what's really struck me is how important, as imperfect as they might be, multilateral platforms like COP are for creating a path forward with the different realities, as Mattias pointed out, between the places like Sweden and the Pacific Islands, where people actually have to talk about relocating. So our next speaker, Jason Channell, was also in attendance at COP28. He's the Managing Director of Sustainable Finance at Citi Global Insights. And I can tell you that he lives up to that title because he always brings valuable insights into analysis on every occasion where I've had the pleasure of hearing him speak. So we're thankful he's joined us here today. Jason has compiled his thoughts in a presentation titled Insights, Trends, and Key Takeaways from Davos and COP28 with the Intensifying Climate Emergency in Focus. And with that, I'd like to welcome Jason to the stage. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me and the team here today. Fascinating panel. I'm going to try and build on that a little bit, as we heard talking about some of the takeaways from COP, but I'll gloss over anything which is repetitive. The first thing I wanted to touch on today, we'll talk a little bit about sustainability and where it is and what's happening, and then actually move on to the future, to what I actually think is coming next, if you like, which is often what people kind of want to know. What's the next big thing? The first question I wanted to touch on today was if you read the media, certainly in different areas around the world, there's a bit of a feeling out there that sort of, ESG is dead, or sustainability is dead, that this is something that we do in the good times when there's lots of money. And actually, if we look around the world with rising rates and inflation and indebted sovereigns and geopolitical unrest, we don't have the time or the money for these sorts of luxuries. And I really just wanted to kind of put that one to bed and say we need to actually think about what sustainability is. I think we probably need to move on from this label of ESG and start thinking about sustainability more in terms of resilience. But if you actually just look at the SDGs, and I've put our library of publications, that's not all of them, but that's some of them on there. You can find all of these if you just Google Citi GPS. But if we look at Davos and the 4 big themes at Davos this year, AI was a very, very big one. Obviously, geopolitical unrest, a big one. Climate, nature, and energy, which we've been hearing about, and we'll hear a lot more about today. And rebuilding trust as well. So if we think about these SDGs that are up here, if we think about geopolitical unrest, we think about number 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. If we think about AI, we think about number 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Or we think about the state of the economy, decent work, and economic growth. You start to look at it and think that this isn't fluffy stuff around on the side. What is in here? And then we think about the other one in terms of rebuilding trust in institutions. Again, that's number 16 again. But we've got to think about equality, and we've got to think about inequality. Obviously, we have number 10 on there, general reduced inequalities within and between nations, but also we have gender equality, and it obviously brings race in as well. So all of these things are fundamental aspects to what's going on in the world at the moment. So whenever you see these stories about going, ESG is off the agenda for the moment, it's absolutely not. These are the defining challenges of our time, whether it's poverty, or look at what's been happening in terms of food security and food price inflation and what that means to economies, or think about the energy transition which is going on. We think about education, we're going to hear about that today, or think about health. This is not fluffy stuff around the edge. This is these are the fundamental and defining challenges of our age, and they are going to require trillions of dollars of investments. Getting it wrong involves significant business and sovereign risks, and getting it right means you can align businesses and strategies with investment megatrends with trillions of dollars which are going to follow them. So I think hopefully that sort of answers a question which I get a lot. In terms of COP28, I'm not going to rehash it. That was a fantastic sort of canter through what actually happened there. There were 2 other aspects to COP which we didn't touch on there. One of which was the global stocktake, and that was a very important aspect of COP28, which was the first time we've done a global stocktake post-Paris, and thinking that it was effectively halfway to 2030. We heard a lot about 2030 and actually where we are. And the numbers that were sort of being talked about there were pretty sobering. So they're talking about a temperature increase of 2.7, 2.8 degrees by 2100. Now, the last time we were at 3 degrees was about 3 million years ago. And sea levels were about 10 to 20 meters higher. So let's not fall into the mistake of thinking that 3 degrees doesn't sound like a lot. It's pretty cataclysmic. And you also have to remember that 3 degrees is not 3 degrees everywhere. That will be 8 degrees in some places, and some places will actually be colder as well. We talked a lot about whether it was a success, etc. I'm not going to run through all of that again, but I think the other aspect which was big there, which we heard a lot less about, was climate finance. And that was a big feature of COP28. Now, over sort of the last 6 or 7 years, we've had climate finance running at about, depending on whose numbers you use, somewhere between 600 and 900 billion dollars a year. Last year, that actually jumped up to about 1.4 trillion. So we're really starting to get there. The problem is that is not nearly enough. We need a good $125 trillion out to 2050. So I talked about, mega investment trends and themes. So we need to be boosting that in all regions to, somewhere north of 5 trillion a year. So the first point to note is that, we need to increase the quantum of it. That gives you a sense of the gap of where we were historically, about 1.7 trillion, and how we need to be boosting that up, as I say, to sort of the 5 trillion level beyond 2030. That is just mitigation, as we heard this morning. Adaptation is another aspect which isn't getting nearly enough capital in. The other element of this, which is you can see there, it's the same in all regions. The other element of this, which is very important, is where that money comes from. So if we look around the world, that 1.4 trillion that I talked about, around about half of it, it's actually 54% of it, comes from private capital. The remaining 46% comes from public capital, and about 70% of that comes from development finance institutions. Now, given the state of indebtedness of sovereigns and where a lot of DFIs, development finance institutions, are maxed out, the reality is we're not going to get that much extra capital out there, given we're talking about needing to move to 5 trillion a year. So the only way we're going to do this, and it harks back to an element of that previous panel in terms of sort of partnerships between the public sector and the private sector, is we have to mobilize private capital. Now, the private capital, it's not that it's not there, it is there in spades. But what we have to do, and again, it comes back to Robert's comments at the end there, is we have to build actual projects instead of investment themes, etc. Build bankable projects. So the reality is we need to boost the quantum of climate finance up to somewhere around about the 5 trillion mark. We've also got to mobilize much more private capital. If we look at adaptation, it's even worse. About 98% of finance for adaptation comes from the public sector. Now, it is incredibly difficult to get private capital into adaptation because it's not necessarily a project that develops a revenue stream, but it is doable. And there's it's not on that thing that I showed you earlier, but this is one we put out for COP28, which is unlocking climate and development finance, and exactly about how you make it happen, development finance, institutional reform, etc., etc. So 2 key messages there. One, we need to boost the absolute quantum to about 5 trillion, and we have to mobilize private capital much more, otherwise we're not going to get to those levels. And that requires reform, let's say, in supranational institutions like the DFIs, private capital, different attitudes, but also a big shift on the part of sovereigns in terms of building an enabling environment and capacity development. And I'm happy to go into those in questions if people want to. One other thing we heard about in that panel was this talking about tripling of renewable energy capacity to 11,000 gigawatts and doubling energy efficiency. I stress before I say this that these are not forecasts, so please don't run around and say Citi says that, because we're not. This is a what-if scenario. If we did triple renewable energy capacity, what would that actually mean for fossil fuels as a share of total primary energy supply? Their share of it would fall by about 46%. So that has a pretty seismic impact on a lot of industries, a lot of countries around the world. I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but I do love this particular chart. This is energy intensity of GDP. Data is a little bit out of date here. We need to update it. But essentially, you've got less developed countries over this side, and you've got countries with more energy-intensive economies up the top. So they use more energy as a per unit of GDP. So basically, you've got manufacturers up here and top left, and then you've got developed economies over here that are more service-based. Now, all those green blocks that are on there are all the countries with net zero targets. There's a lot more now. But essentially what it's telling you is that developed markets and developed countries that don't really manufacture very much anymore have all got the net zero targets, and all the ones that we've outsourced all the manufacturing to don't do it because they're still manufacturing. So what it means you can do is, instead of looking at just emissions, if you actually start looking at CO2 importers, so from products, the CO2 embedded in those products, you've got the usual suspects going across here: USA, Japan, Britain, Italy, France, Germany, etc., etc. So essentially what we're saying is that a lot of these developed countries have outsourced their emissions to emerging markets. There's the same data in map form on the top right. You can see the heavy fossil exporters in blue and the fossil importers in red. And the reason I mention that is it's important because of in Europe we're putting in place what's called a CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. So what it means is that, you know, not everything yet, but perhaps ultimately we're going to tax things that come across the border from jurisdictions that don't have an equivalent carbon price. We've heard about IRA in the US, and you know, all of these things are positive from a development perspective as well, but from people that are on the outside of it, other people look at it and say, well, that's essentially climate protectionism, and we're going to start hearing more and more about that. The reason I mention it is something that we need to think about. If we are going to do this, and there are many caveats as to, you know, why we won't get to that 11,000 by 2030, etc. But obviously, you know, I'm not gonna go through that, don't worry, but that's every industry and country and carbon intensity by industry. So it gives you a sense of all the level of data that we go into. But what we need to think about is, if we're going to do this, this is going to have a profound impact on global trade, and it's going to have a profound impact on what gets transported from where to where, etc. So something that we need to start thinking slightly more laterally about. It would be remiss of me not to talk about the rise of S. I know it's a bright green summit today, which sort of implies environmental side of it, but S is very much screaming up the agenda in the world of sustainability, and you can see that from those topics at Davos as well. This is a report we wrote with Oxford University a couple of years ago. Again, pretty sobering. We tend to think about poverty, and we, you know, think it's a minor issue in some parts of the world. If you look at, again, this data's slightly out of date now, but COVID certainly didn't help. If you look at this bottom line, that was the previous international poverty line. That's people that exist on less than $1.90 a day, so that's less than you spent on a coffee this morning. That's about 10% of the people in the world, so it's about 800 million. Even if you look at that upper poverty line, $5.50 a day, still absolutely nothing. We're still talking about 40% of people in the world, right? So this is not a minor issue. This is in corporate supply chains. We heard about this, even if those countries are domiciled in developed markets. And what we did with Oxford was highlighting a thing that two particular professors have developed, this multidimensional poverty index, which essentially breaks it down and says poverty isn't just about money. It's about, do you have access to education, to health, political representation, all the many different ways in which poverty can manifest itself. So S very much screaming up the agenda. One aspect of it is food security and hunger. In the interest of time, I'll gloss over this quickly, but again, we think about this in terms of, well, it only affects a few people in the world. If you look at severe food insecurity on the top right there, you can see again that's about 10% of people, 800 million, where that's defined as running out of food or going an entire day without eating at times of the year. And even moderate food insecurity, we're talking about a couple of billion people around the world. So, you know, it's been exacerbated by certain geopolitical issues. But, you know, again, this is a sustainability thing. So when people are talking about, oh, ESG is dead at the moment, it's absolutely not. It's absolutely front and center. It's just a bit more data there, but again, showing you that 70 to 80% of people in Southern Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa can't afford a healthy diet. And it also makes you realize on the top right there that this is very much an issue which affects lower middle income and low income countries, regions, and individuals in society. So again, it very much harks back to those issues of inequality, etc., which we've been hearing about. The other reason food is incredibly important is because of this chart on the top left, which is the emissions which come from food and agriculture. And to put that 16,000 in context, it's about 53 gigatons of emissions in the year, in the world each year. So we're getting about 30% of emissions come from food and agriculture industry. Now, the reason that matters is because we are going to have to feed another 1.5 to 1.8 billion people by 2050. The majority of those are coming in Sub-Saharan Africa and Southern Asia, where we've already got serious food insecurity. So this is not going away. This is fundamentally linked into climate change. We published another report for COP28 looking at food, water, and climate change as a nexus. Bringing the sort of food and agriculture side of into it also brings biodiversity loss to the fore. Again, this is not a fluffy thing. $44 trillion of global GDP dependent on, or highly or moderately dependent on nature. Some of those stats on the left there, I'm not going to go through, but pretty sobering again. We've effectively lost 50% of the life on land in the course of my life. And it is economically significant, but obviously it's very important from an environmental perspective as well. Corporates have got to start thinking about this in terms of what we call double materiality, which is how are they dependent on nature in terms of raw materials, but also what's the impact on nature. And the reason this really, really matters is because of this thing called TNFD. So we had the framework released for this in September last year. We all know about the TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. Amazing that we've moved. If you go back to Paris, 2015, people were still arguing about whether climate change was happening in some circles. Within 7 or 8 years, we've now moved to mandatory reporting on carbon in certain jurisdictions around the world. If you think the TCFD, in terms of counting carbon and reporting on it, is tough, at least a ton of CO2 is the same wherever you are in the world. You can count it, price it, trade it, etc. Nature doesn't have an equivalent of a ton of CO2. It doesn't have that sort of beacon on the hill of 1.5, 2 degrees. The issues for nature are going to be very, very location specific and very different by different industries. So this framework, which is there, corporates, it's voluntary at the moment in the same way that TCFD originally was voluntary for everyone, but institutional investors are already starting to ask questions on this, starting to sort of score their portfolios, etc. So corporates are going to have to start thinking about this stuff. One big aspect of that, which hasn't had enough attention, nearly enough attention, is oceans. It does have its own SDG. Oceans produce 50% of the oxygen we breathe. They absorb 30% of that CO2 we're talking about. And interestingly, they absorb 90% of the heat that comes from those emissions. If you want a fun stat for your next dinner party, if the oceans hadn't absorbed all that heat and CO2, we're talking about 1.5, 2 degrees at the moment. We would already be 35 degrees higher. So be under no illusion how important oceans are. And that is going to become increasingly important for companies having to consider that and report on that, because as you can see, it's one of the realms of the TNFD. So my big prediction for this year and next year in terms of what is going to go front and center is this one, which hasn't had nearly enough attention. So the SDG 14, the oceans one, received by far the least financing of all the SDGs. I think that's probably going to start to change. People are starting to talk about blue economy, blue bonds, etc. But this one also is going to become huge because of where I was talking about this point about dependency on nature, but the impact that you have. So this is going to drive, TNFD is going to drive, I think, a much greater focus on resource use and waste and circularity as well. So I think that is going to be a big change for the forwards. That's 1 second. I am now over time. That's where I wanted to leave it, really, with where we started, is to look at it and say, look, these are the defining challenges of our time, but they're also the defining opportunities of our time. It's not fluffy stuff that is things that we do when times are good and we've got lots of money. You know, they're fundamentally part of businesses and the economy. They're not going away. We have to stop looking at it as a cost. It isn't a cost. If you're doing it properly and you're focusing on materiality, it is an opportunity, and they are opportunities which involve and will involve trillions of dollars of investment. If you get it wrong, it's an existential risk for a corporate, potentially for a sovereign, but also for us as individuals. If you get it right, you can jump on the back of potentially the biggest investment opportunities in history, at the same time as tackling challenges that faces the environment and improving the lives of billions of people around the world, which sounds like a pretty good opportunity to me. So I will leave it there.
You made the point quite well, how important it is that we leverage finance in the fight against climate change and really all of the other SDGs. But a couple of questions leapt to mind. One is, what does a bankable project look like? Like, do you have any concrete examples?
I mean, it's all, I mean, people can go away and read about it in much more detail there, but I think the easiest way to describe it is almost by talking about what isn't. So what we've had from a lot of particularly emerging markets is we get concepts, not projects. So bankers will, you know, they're used to rocking up and they want to see a data room with feasibility studies and economic models and, you know, planning consents and all these sort of things, and, you know, 30 studies in there. There is a vast gulf between that point and what a lot of countries are coming up saying, we want to do this, or we want to build a, you know, we want to transition our energy network. There's a massive gulf in between, and that's why I talked about this point about capacity building and an enabling environment, so that countries are coming up with well thought out, integrated plans with specific projects. Now the private sector needs to help with that, the DFIs need to help with that as well, everyone working together, but so that we bridge that gap between sort of concepts and actual physical projects on the ground. And then from the private sector, we need to start understanding risk better, because the perception of risk in EMs is often overstated. Part of that is the DFIs starting to release a lot of the data that they have in the GEMS database, etc., so that we can understand default risk better and actually price that capital better. But that's the key point, is getting bankable projects which can happen. The capital wants to do it, and we know how to do it by blending finance. It's just that information gap and moving from a concept to an actual project.
And then just a quick follow-up to that is, are there governments that are like showing some best practices when it comes to this enabling environment, that are setting up the right policies, the right conditions for? Yeah,
I mean, there's a few. I don't want to get into sort of specifics, but there's quite a few case studies that are in that report that you can look at, where you know, some of them in Latin America, some of them in Eastern Europe, etc., where they've, you know, got, if you like, sort of all the ducks in a row in terms of, you know, education, building, you know, focusing on a particular industry and building capacity in that industry, but part of an integrated plan, so that they make sure that they've got the workforce, they've got the local construction companies, they've got the supply chains. Things like, obviously you need economic stability, regulatory stability, the rule of law, you know, those things can't be underestimated, because if they're not there, the private capital is just going to look at it and go, that's just the Wild West, I can't do it. So there is a list in there of essentially who does what, who needs to focus on what. So what do sovereigns and the public sector focus on, what do DFIs focus on, and where does the sort of, you know, where does private capital and the private sector need to change its attitude. So
It's an important reminder of how important those fundamentals are for like all innovation in business and economies. Thank you, Jason.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Jason. Jason brought up many things. One of the things he highlighted was countries being importers or exporters of CO2. He also brought up the S in the ESG, the importance of not neglecting all the social aspects. And I think also the G, the governance perspective. And now we are actually addressing all of this by digging deeper into trade and investment as a means for, again, financing the transition. So I am very pleased to introduce Dr. Marek Reuter from the Stockholm School of Economics and affiliated to MISUM, who will be moderating a session now together, and his panelist will be Pernilla Liljesson, an expert in export and trade promotion at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs here in Stockholm, in Sweden. Erik Savola, Nordic Banking Head and Country Officer for Sweden at Citi, Jason's colleague. And Mattias Wikström, CEO and founder of Doconomy. And then we were supposed to be joined by Marianne Drain from the U.S. Embassy, but she, as so many others, had caught an infection, so she's at home. But very, very happy to have Tula Ahlström here, Senior Commercial Specialist at the U.S. Embassy here in Stockholm. So, Marek, the floor is yours to kick off the panel.
Thank you very much, Viveka. Is the microphone working? Yeah. Thank you very much, Viveka, and also thank you very much, AmCham, again, for giving us this platform here, providing us platform to talk about this very important issue of how we can combat this grand challenge of climate change here together. And I think we have a great panel here, and I would like to directly kick this off with kind of where we left off before already, with some theme of the COP28, right? And maybe also Davos. A couple of days ago, global leaders were meeting again to talk about this concern and others. And it's also an opportunity to kind of like continue this conversation that you already had in November, right? Where most of you at least discussed with Torkel Strömsten, and he also brought up COP28, where he asked you about your expectations at that time, right? That you have from your own very perspectives on COP28. So now that more than 1 month has passed, I think we can talk a little bit more about the implications, really, yeah? They become clearer how it really features in your particular work domains, yeah? How has this really impacted your different perspectives that you have on climate change, really? And maybe we start with you, Erik. And we already had sort of like a Citi right now, but I think you're well positioned to represent here the capital market perspective a little bit more, right? So, and the capital market perspective is given great weight as a sort of like solution, in particular in the European Union, right, to combat this grand challenge. So what is the implication really here? How did capital market actors perceive COP28, and how did it change probably their agenda, really?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me as part of this panel. I thought it was a big watershed moment in a way, that we've had fossil fuels as the backbone of global economy for 150 years, 80% of the energy mix, fossil-based and so on. And we're saying we are sort of moving away from it. Okay, maybe the wording could have been a bit stronger and so on and so forth, but that's a big change. And that will drive huge change in the way the economy works and what the companies do, where the companies invest, employ people and so on. Also very specifically on methane, what the 50 companies have agreed to do, very practical, highly impactful. So it feels to me, and I'm definitely, I think Emilia was saying, glass half full person. I am one of those people as well, but it feels like the momentum is picking up, at least from my perspective. So I think that was the first thing. The second thing is how much capital is required, right? We talked about commitments in billions. The requirements are in trillions, whether it's clean energy investment that needs to go into triple the capacity or efficiency being doubled, or it's adaptive financing in billions, $200 to $400 billion every year, because unfortunately it's already a reality, or what needs to be invested by countries to fulfill their national obligations, right? Was it $6 trillion? So we are talking about millions and billions. The requirements are in trillions, which is very humbling. The money needs to be found somewhere. And then I think what Jason was talking about, to Peter's question about what makes a bankable project. I'd just like to say that what is bankable here in developed markets, Sweden in particular, I think we've seen 2 big announcements from big Swedish companies, both Northvolt and H2 Green Steel in the last week or so. That's difficult. It's new technology, large-scale projects, a lot of government backing, and we're in developed markets, and that's not easy. Can you imagine what the scale of the task is in emerging markets? And I think, I'm clearly a practitioner, and we're in 96 countries around the world. So I'm thinking, what does it take from translating COP28 commitments into action around the world in countries that don't have the same rule of law, don't have the same legal or political certainty, where the technology is untested, and so on and so forth, right? So quite a lot to do, but I thought good progress, and also the fact that there's more data, and more data will be coming. I think that will help us a lot.
Thank you very much, Eric. Mattias, you represent, I would say, a little bit the entrepreneurial perspective here, and in particular in the area of sustainable business, right, where you're a founder of a company. And if I'm not mistaken, you have been present at both events, right? COP and also Davos. Is that correct? Yeah. So how did you perceive these both events? And maybe you can also say something about whether you feel that the decisions and negotiations that had been taking place at COP, whether and how they affected really the happenings at Davos.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for having me. Firstly, I must say that having direct access to the knowledge and the insights coming out of such a large institution as Citi, and we have Jason and now also built on that, it's truly amazing. But it also reinforces my notion that banks are really at the very center of this transformation and the transition that we need to see, being the fundamental kind of driving force, addressing funding, but also know-how, and as they said, if money doesn't cross borders, bullets will, and I think that financial services is instrumental to that, and that is also what we at Techarenan are trying to do. Coming back to your question, more bottom-up than top-down, I would say. In Glasgow, India throw us a bit of a curveball in the negotiations in regard to phasing out coal. I know Mattias is here, so I'm not going to try to disclose any of the reactions in the negotiations coming out of Glasgow. We had Channell building up on that, putting an empty bucket on the table for loss and damage, still empty, but still a bucket. And we saw, to my perspective at least, what came out of Dubai was extremely positive, because we stepped away from the we and them. And I think the polarization is so prevalent in many parts of the world and in many ways. But in Dubai, I felt that was reduced to a large extent. And I think the outcome that I was expecting from Dubai was less positive than the actual outcome. what happened in Dubai didn't stay in Dubai. It transferred into Davos. Davos showed a larger understanding for this to such a great extent, I would say, that sustainability is not necessarily on the agenda anymore. It's the platform and the agenda for everything. Businesses has understood that. I think there's a recent research coming out of Deloitte that 98% of companies today already see damage done by the climate crisis, as I personally prefer to reference it. 52% of the population in the US in 2022 believe that companies could do something and should do something about it. Davos, in short, I would say tech, but not necessarily only AI. It was a technology, environment, conflict, and hope. Technology being predominantly AI, of course, and what can we do with AI? AI is never going to be smarter than what data we feed it with. There is expectations on AI that our ability to feed it is not meeting right now. So expectations will be somewhat disappointed. Short term, long term, of course, is going to have great effect. It's also number one short-term risk on the World Economic Forum global risk report being misinformation. AI, of course, being a powerful tool in the wrong hands for that. IMF saying, hey, you know, AI can be very harmful. And of course, we have the CEO of Microsoft saying, hey, it can be very beneficial. So I'm sure there's different opinions on that. Out of an environmental perspective, nature came on the agenda in a much stronger way, giving it a voice, giving it funding. We saw Landsbanking Group looking at doing just that, making nature count in a more tangible way. Out of a conflict perspective, we saw less heads of state participating in this year's Davos for many different reasons. But we're also in a period where we see a lot of the world's democracies stepping into elections, circling back to misinformation. And those elections and the outcomes of that, there was an interesting article in Bloomberg leading up to Brexit and Trump stepping into office called The 20% World. The same journalist now wrote a piece on the 10% world, which I encourage everyone to read because I find it quite hopeful. And hope being the age in tech, I think history is not an arch, and Davos showed us that it is the aggregation of all of our actions that defines our tomorrow. And we can choose to draw a line in the snow and say enough is enough, and everyone can do what they can. A day like this, obviously, with the rain outside, it's harder to do. But that's obviously also a strong signal that we need to step up to this. Davos in general, is it all about the latest trends, or is it actually about making a better place, saving the world, or providing a better tomorrow for the next generation? I think, as always, Davos 2024 will be judged by how we remember it in 25.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Mattias. So, in summary, you're saying action is really picking up, and that's also what I'm getting from you. And I really appreciate that and to hear that. Yeah, I think that's a very positive sign, since it has been lamented for so long that action has been missing. And maybe that leads over to the next two participants here on the stage, Tula and Pernilla. And I think you can represent pretty well the governmental regulatory perspective, right? Which has oftentimes also been criticized to lag behind a little bit in implementing strong regulations, at least in my field of research, which is broadly deals with the practices of social and environmental accounting and control. There's great consensus that what we really need for effective governance of sustainability in organizations and industries is a strong regulatory institutional infrastructure, so to speak, that bolsters sustainability. And we've talked before here about who should be in the driving seat, right? And I think regulators play an important role here, even though maybe business is moving ahead a little bit more, but to sort of like, you know, set the stage and say, okay, so how much leeway right and left is there? Or for example, for sort of like defining notions of what sustainability actually means, right? And in which direction we are really moving. So I would be very interested in your reflection on how did COP28 and maybe now also Davos recently impact your work in the context of working for regulatory agencies, right, or governmental agencies. Pernilla, maybe you can start. You have a little bit more the European perspective here, and then we can go on later with Tula.
All right. Thank you so much for having me to talk about this important topic. I'm representing the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and I'm working in a trade department, working with trade promotion, investments, competitiveness, and sustainable business. So you can say a lot of things about COP28, but when we met in November ahead of COP28, I think there were a lot of worried voices a little bit, and hesitance and skepticism perhaps also. We have to show that the Paris Agreement is working. So first reflection is perhaps a little bit of a relief that, yes, very positive outcome. I mean, I think Sweden and Mattias has been pushing a lot for more ambition. But, I mean, having said that, I think the agreement that you put up on was historic to really have an agreement on transitioning out of fossil fuels. So that will have a lot of implications, even if as with other COP agreements, it's non-binding, the timelines are not really there, etc. It will have implications both for private sector and policymakers. We will find mechanisms to implement this and to follow up on this. So the agreement is there, it means something. So that is the first reflection, positive outcome, and things will now accelerate even more. Second reflection, that was also mentioned earlier, but COP28 convened a record number of people, but I'm thinking about private sector, that this has really turned into a meeting place for business and trade. And you were pointing to this. My opinion is that private sector is, in general, ahead of policymakers in providing solutions to climate change. So this is an important aspect of the negotiations. I think that private sector really goes there, is pushing policymakers and represents the possibility agenda to find this, to inspire and to give hope that the solutions are there, and it's really an implication for policymakers where we all need to do more to have a solutions-oriented approach. That policy should really enable private sector to step in. And we can come back to that with the financial markets, how to mobilize private capital even more, and it's the role of policymakers is really to enable that, and that we want to come back to. For Sweden, I mean, what is when we talk about trade and investments, this has become more and more a whole of government approach. It's not something just that the trade minister can do. So when we combine the climate policy with trade and investments, it's really a growth agenda and a whole of government approach. So the government just recently adopted a foreign trade related strategy that is, with you, the Prime Minister is mentioning to all the ministers that this is a whole of government approach to achieve this, where you combine climate action with trade and investments, etc. To really position also Sweden as a partner to provide solutions to the climate ambition. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Pernilla. Tula, what's your viewpoint? What's the role of regulators, and what are the implications of COP for regulators?
Thank you, first of all, having me here. I'm sorry if somebody came here to see Marianne train. Unfortunately, she's very ill, so you have to do with me. Everybody has mentioned fossil fuels, and I just want to mention it because it's going to affect all the regulations. I mean, with IRA and all the other acts that US has passed recently, are due to fossil fuels, but I think it's going to push it even more. If you think of the United States and all the different states and their energy portfolios, some of them have very little renewables or alternative energies on them now, making it more concrete by actually mentioning it at COP28, I think is going to boost the federal regulatory system and even on the state level, the different regulatory system and portfolio demands. Nobody has mentioned the triple to the nuclear energy that was discussed at COP28. I want to mention it because I think it's going to be boosting the development of the safer, new, smaller reactors. Everybody agrees that nuclear energy has to be part of the energy portfolio because it's not a fossil energy. The new reactors, it has taken very long time for the small modular reactors to get into the market. And agreements like this, it's probably closer to 30 countries already that are part of it, are most likely going to increase the research and make it faster because it has been, I mean, Sweden is also changing its energy portfolio and looking at new nuclear again, but we have to have those new technologies in order for it to be meaningful. So I think that's a really positive thing. As was touched, the private sector participation at COP28, I think has always been a very important part of it. I wasn't here. Last time I was very involved in COP, it was COP15 when it was in Copenhagen, so it's a long time ago. But the private sector portion of it is always there. And the programs that the different pavilions and country offices organize are really the ones where the conversations are happening between private sector, public sector, academia, all of them discussing small things, but they are the ones that probably continue to the next COP and something happens in between, sort of catalyzing that from those meetings. And I think it's very important. They are not that visible to everybody. Everybody talks about the negotiations and all the deals and pacts and pledges, but that part is also very important. And that's what we see most, because companies came even before COP28 to ask us, what is US doing at COP28? Please let us know what kind of programs you have. So that is a very important part of it and should be given it the importance that it has.
That's a very interesting reflection. So you're saying there's a front stage and a backstage, actually, right?
It's a little bit like that.
And a lot of the regulation is also happening in the backstage, and of course then maybe taking a little bit of time. But I want to say that, and maybe we can continue with that and stick a little bit around with the regulatory regulation topic here, that even on the front stage, we have actually in recent years seen a little bit more action and substantial things happening from both national and supranational regulators, right, who have implemented public climate policies, in particular directed for the corporate sector, right? So we have touched upon before on the topic of the Inflation Reduction Act. Tula, maybe you can, and we have heard in particular how it can drive green economic activity within the US. Maybe you could expand on that a little bit and say something about how the IRA might affect the transatlantic trade between the US and in particular Europe then.
Mm-hmm. I think first and foremost, the Inflation Reduction Act is a catalyst. When you combine federal funding, the private funding comes to it because you have concrete projects like some bankable projects, whatever you call them. And I think US can never do it on their own because you have 50 plus states in a very different stages. And some of them, like I said before, need a lot of help with their energy portfolios and all the other aspects that IRA covers. I think it's both catalyst for the private investors to look into the project, but also for new technologies to be launched. And that's where definitely the Europe is a large part of it. US always encourages foreign investment, and I mean Swedish clean tech companies. We have the Select USA program at the embassy that promotes investments from Sweden to US. And Swedish clean tech companies have been in contact with us probably the last of 15 years. And now the connection is totally different because now you actually have concrete projects to look at. And they are not all asking for US content only. So you really need to, it has a lot of, I mean, since I was a last-minute addition, I had a lot of materials with me. There's a huge PowerPoint about all the possibilities within IRA, within the different categories that are provided incentives for. And there are definitely opportunities for both export from the EU and investments from the EU. But first and foremost, I think it's to make the United States, different states, to wake up and start looking at their energy portfolios seriously, because otherwise you would never meet any of the quotas that you need to meet soon.
Thank you, Tula. Pernilla, maybe you can add from that a little bit more the European perspective. I mean, there is a lot of talk about protectionism around these sort of laws and so on. What's your opinion? What's your point of view here? Do we have to be afraid that the IRA can drive out investments from Europe into the US now that it has become quite of like a very attractive destination for this kind of corporate activities? Or what's your take there?
Well, I think we really welcome that the US is now really in this race to do the transition and to spur investments in green technologies, etc. But as you mentioned and put it, I mean, Sweden is really for free trade, and as a small and an open economy, we really need to stick to that. So to give privilege to US companies, etc., of course there is a risk that it could be discriminatory to European companies, and also to start some sort of race for subsidies, etc., in green technologies. There are positive aspects to that, but you really need to look carefully not to distort or to disturb the market. So I think the European strategy is a little bit different, perhaps, to try to find market-based mechanisms to spur these kind of investments. But I mean, having said that, I mean, IRA is a welcome thing, because you can also see how big numbers of trade in US and Swedish exports and investments, and that is of course positive. I'm glad that there is now a transatlantic task force on this to try to avoid also the negative aspects of it. I think on the European level, I mean, already in 21, the Fit for 55 package, that it tries really to make the climate goals into legal obligations, is one way of doing it. And last year, during the Swedish presidency of the EU adopted the final parts of that package. So that is something we believe will really deliver on the climate targets, and shows also that Europe is leading the way and is taking a leadership, and that we want to work together with partners like the US and global partnerships. The toolbox has been already mentioned. We have a little bit of a different toolbox in Europe, with I think the ETS and the emissions trading systems as one major tool really to achieve this. Since its introduction, emissions in EU have really decreased by 41% or something like that. So that is quite substantial. So it's working. We will build on that. And I think also you are thinking about the new reporting directive. That is also contributing, of course, to this, that you can measure and disclose information about impacts of European companies, their activities, and the impacts on people and the environment. So I think that also will contribute. So those kind of policy instruments to work together with private sector and to spur action is the way to go. I think there are a lot of initiatives, but these are two major ones in the toolbox that we are working on the European level.
Thank you very much. So a different approach in the European Union than we see in the US. And Mattias, so the European Union is certainly, as you indicated, and champion this kind of like facilitating transparency and hopefully then also accountability, right, around the topic of sustainability for corporations, in particular with the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainable Reporting Directive, but also the SFDR, right? And this really pushes the practice of performance measurement and sustainability accounting for corporations. Now, you founded a company that deals especially with this kind of topic of measuring sustainability and accounting for it. Can you maybe in a general manner expand on why you think measuring sustainability and accounting for it is important to facilitate a greener economy?
It's foremost important for comparability. Without comparability, competition is lost. Without competition, there is no winners, and we need to understand, coming back to what Jason said and Mark Carney as well, looking at this as the largest ever commercial opportunity in the world that we have seen. One of the largest challenges for sure, but also the largest opportunity. So absolutely comparability, and I think transparency is at core in order to have that comparability credible. At Economy, my ambition is to drive one of the largest ever climate action, kind of climate literacy projects, educating the many around cause and effect, understanding that what happens here impacts what happens here. I think that the IRA is one of the most beautiful things that has ever happened. I think Europe is also leading the way. We're playing different instruments in this orchestra. So in Europe, we're trying to use regulation to get stuff done, coming back to comparability, transparency, reporting, which is great. In the US, they put a big pile of cash on the table, ask the market to resolve it. If we're stepping away and looking at it a little bit from afar, brilliant. If you can become rich in saving the planet will be saved in no time. That's the most powerful driver we have, right? So that needs to happen. But I think there's one thing missing here, or maybe there is two, adding to wealth out of a W perspective. We have water and we have women. Water is extremely important, and Jason dipped his toe in it just shortly in his presentation, but looking at what the oceans are doing and the very unfortunate political decisions in Norway now in regard of deep sea mining, exploratory, sure, but that is complete and utter bullshit. Looking at women, another challenge we see. If we are going to get this change done, all of us need to contribute. We need to run at full capacity, not at 50%. Looking at what's happening or happened, Azerbaijan, the climate committee in COP29 appointing, was it 28 men or was it 18? I can't remember. Well, it's 100%, 100% men. Come on, we need to do better than that, right? Surely 2 weeks later, they added 12 women, which was due to a lot of political pressure, of course. But we need to run this at full capacity. That's the main thing. Reporting is not going to get us there. Using everyone's brain and everyone's abilities is. So let's not focus on the tools, but also on how we use them.
Thank you very much. Eric, so if you can make money with sustainability, then the problem will be solved in no means. And I sort of like agree. I think we have, the capitalist system has a lot of potential really to solve complex problems here. And if we talk about the regulatory initiatives like the CSRD or the SFDR, for example, right? Then, I mean, on the one hand, they are directed towards facilitating greater accountability to what you could say broader civil society, right? But on the other hand, they are also always rhetorically directed then towards, you know, the investor community and investor needs, so to speak, yeah? And I would be interested in your perspective here. So in which way do you really see that these regulations drive the investor community? Like, are investors really interested in these kind of numbers that are published there in reports? Do they really take, let's say, substantial action instead of only on a rhetorical level? What's your take here, and what's the perception here? Maybe what are the recent developments?
Okay, first of all, I'm getting a sense from Peter that the time is probably up, so let me be quite short and sweet. Investors need data. right? And what Mattias was saying is 100% aligned with how we think about it. You need to be able to compare. You need the winners, as you said. Investors are changing their approach. I think there's far more focus on making the science part of the investment decision, and you see what kind of people investors employ these days. Data scientists, environmental scientists, as part of that decision-making process. You can't make decisions without proper information, proper data. And the more data we're going to start getting from next year, I think, at least from the European perspective, what a great opportunity it is to dig deeper and get more insights. I think that would be absolutely critical. We need the data to assess the impact on our companies, on how successful they are with their strategies, how successful we think they will be, how competent the management teams are, the boards are, and whether there's transparency for the broader society. So I think this is super, super important. And it's one of those things where you see much progress from where we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It means that things are actually starting to accelerate.
Thank you very much. Time is precious. Not only in the fight against climate change, but also at the Bright Green Summit, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, because this is a great conversation, and trade and investment obviously plays a huge role. As many people have said, banking is right at the center of fighting climate change. But also something Tula mentioned is key at these sorts of settings is what happens on stage and also what happens off stage. So right now we have a short break for fika to have some important conversations to see what happens next. And then we have to be back in here at 11:15 for the next speaker, Minister Persson. Thank you. if you can grab your seats, we're like a few minutes behind schedule, but hopefully you all have had some fruitful conversations. Like one of the, a couple of the red threads from this morning already, it's important how important it is to have public-private dialogue and, government-to-government dialogue, academic-to-academic dialogue, and business-to-business dialogue as well. So hopefully you had some fruitful conversations. And the other thing I think that's really key is like how important finance is, and that we get to collaboration, bankable projects, and actual action. So today, in addition to public officials and corporate executives at the Bright Green Summit, our audience is also well represented by students here at Space Arena from Hyper Island and Stockholm School of Economics, especially through MISUM, who volunteered their time to help us make the program run smoothly. So just want to take a minute and recognize them and give them a round of applause. Thank you for your help today. Also, during our lunch and fika mingle this afternoon, I encourage everyone to check out the virtual reality program that Hyper Island has created in the display area. They also created this magnificent backdrop here as well, which has like caught my attention all morning. So they were created by Hyper Island, so we're very grateful for their outstanding contribution to bringing a visual impact to what makes the program of the Bright Green Summit stand out. In addition to the students here, we have students and teachers at high schools in the US and gymnasiums in Sweden who have joined us online in the metaverse today. The US side of that equation is probably just starting to join, and there'll be more of them online this afternoon. The metaverse setup was made possible by Thomas Benz and Tim Anderson from the Nordic Metaverse Alliance, so we want to thank them for creating this unique digital environment for our online audience. And I know Tim is here. I don't think I've seen Thomas yet, but so thank you, Tim and Thomas. Now it's my great pleasure to invite Minister Persson, who is the Minister for Education, to the stage. Following his address, he's also going to be joining our research and education panel discussion. Minister Persson has served in this position in the Ministry for Education and Research since 2022, where he's responsible for research and higher education, including adult education, space issues, and student finance, among other areas of focus. So with that, I would like to turn the stage over to Minister Persson. Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to begin with thanking the American Chamber of Commerce in Sweden for the invitation to this very important event. I'm very much looking forward to it. And the Swedish government recognized the interaction of education, excellent research, innovation, and climate action. It forms a cornerstone of a sustainable future. And today I will shortly outline some strategic initiatives and investments undertaken by the government to harness the synergy of different initiatives in order to forge a greener tomorrow. We must switch to a fossil-free energy system, and this transformation requires a robust foundation of knowledge and innovation, encompassing both natural and social sciences and humanities. We also need more engineers and scientists to drive the green industrial transformation and to supply long-term economic growth. Acknowledging the urgent need for more engineers and natural scientists, the Swedish government has in the budget bill initiated a significant investment in expanding engineers and master's program, creating 2,000 new full-time study openings all around Sweden. These initiatives, along with an increasing need for the quality of technological and natural science disciplines, that are important steps towards creating the necessary conditions allowing for Sweden to take a leading role in the global climate transformation. Sweden's ambitions in technology shows the need for a continuous supply of skilled engineers and scientists. The planned STEM strategy, the Swedish government now are going to propose a STEM strategy. It starts from preschool and it ends all the way up to the PhD levels. To ensure a steady flow of talent, it is vital that students are drawn to the natural science and the technology program at the upper secondary level, fostering interest and providing a foundation for further studies in these fields. The government is not just focusing on quantity, we're also striving for diversity. And encouraging more women to pursue and complete engineering program is a priority. Our comprehensive strategy aims to strengthen STEM throughout the whole education system, preparing Sweden to remain a cutting-edge technology nation. Looking beyond our own country, the polar regions serve as critical indicators of the health of our global climate. The observations and measurements collected from these regions are indispensable for our understanding of the planet's swift climate transformation. And the work carried out with the icebreaker Oden, the Nordic or Swedish icebreaker Oden, over the past 34 years, complemented by our scientific collaborations with the United States and other countries, has established a global precedent. The well-known history of Swedish polar research, strengthened by international collaborations, underscores the urgent necessity for a continued access to a fit-for-purpose polar research vessel. Therefore, the Swedish government is currently exploring the options for a new state-of-the-art research vessel for year-round service in the toughest possible ice conditions. Such an investment would be a big step to empower research within advanced tools regarding climate data, improving models of global warming, and shaping environmental policy. Looking beyond our planet, I had the pleasure to observe the successful launch of Marcus Wandt, our third Swedish astronaut to the International Space Station. He is, in fact, up in space right now. This event marks a significant step in our national space ambitions and is an example of our commitment to scientific advancement and education, particularly in STEM disciplines. For a small and smart country like Sweden, having a third astronaut is a great sign of our ambitions for space. Astronauts and space missions excite and inspire future generations to pursue STEM careers. There were so many highly skilled people involved in launching Marcus Wandt and his fellow travelers to space. And it is safe to say that you can contribute to science and to the exploration of space safely from Earth if you, as I am, are not prone to flying that high. Space exploration is not only about reaching new frontiers. Space-based infrastructures and services are integral to our understanding of climate change and to our capacity of succeeding with the green and digital transformation. Climate change mitigation and adaptation is a priority. As we harness data from Earth observation satellites, we equip ourselves with the knowledge to enact effective environmental policies. Our future on this planet and beyond rests on the shoulders of a well-educated workforce that can steer the wheel of technological advancement. The government wants to create the necessary conditions for a workforce with advanced skills, particularly in sectors driving the green and digital transitions. The government's education policy is hence tailored to equip individuals with competencies that match with the transformative demands of climate action and digital innovation. And this approach not only reinforces Swedish industrial competitiveness, but also fortifies our societal framework and democratic values. Time is running out for limiting the global average temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. The government welcomes the agreement at COP28 to transition away from fossil fuels into more modern energy systems. By prioritizing education that addresses current competency gaps, the government lays the groundwork for a sustainable future, safeguarding our welfare and bolstering national defense through informed expertise. A skilled workforce strengthens the opportunities for business actors to develop the solutions that can accelerate the transition globally. My final message on our strategic initiatives targets our continued efforts to advance excellence, internationalization, and innovation in terms of research and education. Sweden may be a small country, but we have high ambitions of Swedish research, not only be of high quality, but globally competitive. And in the Budget Bill 2024, the government continues to invest in excellence centers with international impacts, and we aim to prioritize strategic areas where research is crucial. Finally, these strategic actions and investments by the Swedish government reflects our firm commitment to a sustainable future. Through education and research, we equip ourselves with the tools to craft a greener, more resilient world. It is through the merging of technological science and a passion for the environment that we can truly make a positive climate impact a reality. Thank you for your commitment to this cause, and let us continue to work together for a brighter and greener future. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Thanks for sharing Sweden's plan to develop like a STEM education system or to further enhance it. It's going to be obviously super important to have scientists both studying the climate going forward and also working to develop the solutions to mitigate and adapt. And thank you also for agreeing to join the panel, which we'll welcome up to the stage now. So joining the minister on the panel will be Marie Jurisso, who is the Deputy Director and Operations Director at the Stockholm Environment Institute. Tobias Alfvén, who is the professor and specialist physician at SESH, the Center for Excellence for Sustainable Health at Karolinska Institutet, and Magnus Berggren, who's a professor and director for WISE, which is WISE is the Wallenberg Initiative for Material Science for Sustainability. So welcome. And I have the pleasure to moderate this panel. As I mentioned earlier today, like education, when I repeated it in the welcome, it's super important. It's important as I'm a policy geek myself, but it's important when you're developing policy to educate policymakers, to educate the public, to educate business. So I'm really looking forward to your insights. But I thought before we go further, I would ask the three panelists who've joined us for your reactions to the minister's remarks, and maybe we'll just start in order, starting with you, Magnus.
Thank you very much, Peter. I very much enjoyed the introduction talk, and my first reflection is that very important that bringing up the STEM strategy for Sweden and going down in age. I have been involved in one investigation with the Engineering Academy here in Sweden, and what we found when monitoring the STEM strategies across Sweden, it differs a lot. I didn't have any favorite municipalities before, but Övertorneå is a favorite municipality of Sweden. a couple of teachers there were recruited from Sweden, and they got the task to develop a STEM strategy. And Övertorneå is one of the municipalities in Sweden recruiting a lot of students into the STEM areas. So small actions can do tremendous impact in recruiting, because in the end, when we are recruiting to the university level, we see that the number of students in engineering science go into research education is going down. So I'm very happy to hear this.
Thank you. Tobias?
So I would like to say thanks again, and I think it's so important that you mentioned the role of Sweden. As you said, we're a small country, but we're a small country, and I really hope that we can keep to that. And as the title of it, Bright Green Summit, we need to be bright. I mean, the challenges, they're massive, but also the possibilities. And I think you mentioned a lot of important things, like this, to build this together. Sweden, we need to see where we have our strength, and we can work with others to build a green and healthy future. And that's really the role of academia. And again, I think it's so good that we represent academia. And we represent academia, and we need to work together with politicians, and we need to work with business, and we need to work with civil society, and all together. Okay. Is this better?
No, no, this was not better. Now it's working. Okay. Should I start again or no? Technology, we need to be smart. And I think that's very important. And technology needs to work, and we need to be smart. And then I would like to start there again to say that it's so important. We here represent academia, and we need to work with politicians, because it's not enough just to get the science. Then we need to get the science into action. And we need to work with business so we can work together, because that's a big part of the action. And then we need to work with civil society. And if we get all these four actors together, then we can be, even if we're small, be a smart country here in Sweden.
Marie?
Yes, so mic test. Maybe not. Try this one instead. So thank you, Minister Persson. Very inspiring to hear about the government's priorities and the really strong commitment that you articulated to the natural sciences in terms of targeted investments towards more engineers, strong commitment to supporting and enabling and leading the green and digital transition. To me, I think, and I think to many of us, climate change is ultimately, an interdisciplinary problem that requires interdisciplinary solutions. So I'd be curious to hear a bit about, where's the role for social science? What does the government see and want to prioritize there in terms of having us as social scientists part of this transition as well? Thanks.
Thank you, Marie. And Minister,
I can answer directly. Yeah, I totally agree. I think there is a need for interdisciplinary frameworks, and both in terms of research, but also in terms of education. So I don't see that there is a contradiction between those things. However, I think that if we're talking about going down in the school system, I think there is a need to emphasize the importance of skills in maths. I think if you look at the developments, I mean, the green transition and the digital transition, they are combining themselves. So I mean, they are not substitutions. They are together. And I think the need for good skills in maths that has increased, giving both the digital and green transition. So I don't see that there is a contradiction, but I also want to emphasize the importance of focusing on the STEM subjects in lower ages in school.
That's an important point, like the twin transitions, because for quite a while we've had some challenges transatlantic-wise with digitalization and data flows, and we won't be able to do the green transition without smooth data flows. But staying with you, Minister Persson, Sweden's going to have a new research bill this autumn, I guess every 4 years, if I understood correctly. So is climate research going to, will it be addressed, or how will it be addressed in that?
Yeah, I'm not going to. It's 6 months or half a year before it will be proposed, so there will be a lot of work going on. But if you look, I think the answer is yes, in different dimensions, because first of all, we have the energy system in Sweden and in Europe and globally, where there is an important need, I would say, on research and education for all types of green parts of the energy system. The water power, the windmills, the solar panels, and the nuclear power. We need all of that in the new era we are going into, because there is such a high demand for energy, because digitalization demands that from us, and also the green transition. So that's the first key, I would say. And secondly, I will really emphasize the importance of the tradition Sweden has. I mean, we are a role model for many other countries. I think that we are a small country, but other countries are looking at Sweden. If you go back to 1990, I mean, if you compare the CO2 emission in Sweden today compared to 1990, we have decreased our emissions by 1/3. We're probably the best country in the world, together with maybe Denmark or some other countries, Netherlands maybe. And I think you can't underestimate the importance showing emerging countries such as India or Brazil that it is possible to have a good economic development and reducing your CO2 emissions at the same time. So what Sweden are doing, it is important from a role model perspective as well.
And Sweden, as we've heard like throughout the morning, it truly is sort of leading, a global leader when it comes to, well, education as a basis for all things innovative that come out of Sweden, which is, as a country of 10 million people, remarkably innovative. Tobias, it's a mic check again for you. What role does education play in combating climate change from your perspective at Karolinska?
And I think it works now, right? And that's great. Technology, it's great with technology, but it needs to work, right? So that's very, very good. And then coming back, I think it's important to see that we as a university, we have 3 different roles. We have research, and we have education, and then the third task, our communication with the surrounding society, and you also mentioned the importance of that. But coming back to education, sometimes we get the question, but you work at the medical university, Karolinska Institute, isn't this just pure technology? We need technology to combat climate change. And as you said, the basis is very much the technology. We need to find solutions. How can we reduce the CO2 emissions? But then it's also very much we need to work with all different disciplines. And already now we see that climate change today has big impacts on our human health. It's not only an issue about ice bears and ice and polar. It's important. And I think it's very, very important also to, if we can show the health effects from climate change, it gets much more real. Without that, it's like, this is not really my issue, it's something for the engineers, but I don't need to care. And at COP28 now, it was the first time it was a whole session just on climate change and health. And coming back to the role of education there, future health practitioners, doctors, nurses, others, they need to understand what the future might look like. So we are prepared. We don't know when will the next big flooding come. What kind of infectious diseases will we have in the future? So we need to prepare for that. And that's one important part of it. But then also to see the role, 4% of all CO2 emissions, they come from the health sector. What can we do to reduce CO2 emissions in the health sector? And then thirdly, it's so important to see the possibilities. There are so many co-benefits. We know it's much, much better for our health to walk or bike to work. And it's also better for the planet. And then we need to see how can we promote that. And then we need to work very closely with politicians, because at the moment, more and more kids, they're actually driven by their parents to school, because we have kids and we want the best for our kids. And if we feel that this is not safe for them to walk or bike to school, of course we drive them. So it's so important to get these co-benefits. And it's the same with food. Many of us, we eat too much. It's a global obesity epidemic, pandemic, I would say. So we need to eat differently, less meat, more plant-based. However, how do we do that? It's good for our health and it's good for the planet. Again, how do we get these co-benefits? And that's the role of education. It's so important. It's not just there. And it's tricky, and then we need to work interdisciplinary. It's easy for me to say to someone, you should eat differently. However, when you have the choice, the chips or the carrots, when I'm a bit hungry, I know where I go.
I have that same predicament, but nudging is important to do both on a personal level, with ourselves and our families, and making it easier to work out in the morning by having your stuff laid out by the side of the bed or whatever, and also through business and academia, and making healthy choice easy in the cafeteria or fika room. So, but kind of staying in that area, Marie, what does the Stockholm Environment Institute do? And given the wide array of disciplines involved in climate research, and you've already touched on this a little, including healthcare and oceanography and agriculture, how can educators and research foster an interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary approach to climate education?
So I think as representing a research institute on this panel, so not a higher education institution, I think something very concretely that we do as an organization is hosting internships. So hosting MSc students, hosting PhD students, and getting them to get that first, professional experience of what it can be like to be a professional researcher outside of academia. I think it's an important part for us in our operations here in Stockholm, but also in our offices across the globe. I think by doing this, we also hope to pave the way for having more academics, more professional researchers out there in society working outside of academia, being represented in these truly interdisciplinary teams that are indeed implementing these projects that are needed to shift the climate change curve. I think another very concrete thing that SEI does, spanning the works of policy and practice and academia, is to really build networks and build platforms and contribute actively to these types of conversations, and doing that and providing a platform for that for students at a very, very early age. So that professional exposure that we can offer as an institute is not to be underestimated.
Yeah, the networking in particular resonates, given that's kind of primarily one of our primary pillars is creating networks in various platforms within the chamber community. But and I think that dovetails nicely also with my question for you, Magnus, which is how do we get the scientific innovation? How do we get it to market or to scale? In particular, how do you speed up the whole process of intellectual property rights, getting the clearances you need?
Yeah, it's a very important question. I read the Circular Action Plan of EU from 2020 a few weeks ago, and I was very happy to see that they highlighted fundamental and basic research, applied research, innovation, but they pinpointed one very important ingredient in this innovation stew, and that is intellectual property rights. In Sweden, we have the exception for teachers, giving us the right as an academic teacher to own our own inventions. Fantastic, but it also comes with a few challenges. So we need to discuss this. We are investing so much into science and also innovation programs. But how do we make sure that we collect our inventions into patents? Patents is not just to keep things. It's not about keeping things. It's actually how to secure that you can use your own invention at the same time telling everyone else how you have done it. And this is the best way to generate an innovation arena all across the world. So this is an important, and I don't have the solution. I see that there are local solutions at the universities how to handle this. But I think this is the ingredient that is important to bring onto the table, because when I was a young CEO of a spin-out company, I was always told, don't rush, it will take you 20 years to get your science out into commercial products. Today, when we monitor the spin-out companies coming from our environments, it's going down. We have companies that have products on the market a year after filing the patents. So having a swift, efficient, and also broad and easy program for securing patents is very important.
So what is sort of missing in the process now? Is it just that the professors or the academics who develop them in the university settings don't worthwhile for them?
When I ask the scientists of the WISE program, what is in the innovation process, how do we fund, how do we pay for patents if this comes down as a private asset, and if you're supposed to pay for the patenting yourself, the possibility for a young professor doing that compared to a professor that has been around for some time and maybe spun out companies. I mean, if it comes down to your private situation, how to pay for patent. There are support, but it's, I would say, very scattered, and I think we can simplify this a lot in Sweden. So I think this is one ingredient that we need to discuss, besides, of course, all the support to science.
Interesting, and I see you all nodding. Does anyone have anything to add to that? Or?
No, what I can add is just the speed. What we saw often, we say in healthcare, that from an innovation, it takes 14 years before it's implemented in the healthcare sector. But what we saw during the pandemic, it was just amazing to see the speed with vaccines, with other interventions. And I think during the last 20 years, the speed has really gone up, but it's not the same everywhere. But when we have a pandemic, when we have a crisis, and I think we need to look at the climate change as a crisis, we need to speed up. We don't have 20 years to look at innovation and then slowly getting it in. We need to see what can we learn from the pandemic to get the speed up and to get the whole society around what is needed in research, in education, and the third task, how we get this out with everybody engaged. So I really think speed is important.
And are there best practices that any of you see in the world in terms of like the countries that are getting it right in terms of getting patents, ideas patented?
Yeah, I'm very impressed of the Israel system for sure, very impressive. And also some of the American universities have very swift and also massive programs to support patenting. A long time ago, I was a postdoc at Bell Labs, AT&T. I was very impressed. We were 6,000 scientists. We had a patent department of 200 people. That is giving a perspective of, and if you go to even a large university in Sweden, you have perhaps one patent lawyer or engineer that can help you. So I think we just need to amplify the support for it.
And is that just because of the difference in how they're treated? So if it's a patent that you develop while you're working at Bell Labs.
Exactly. And then, of course, as an employee of Bell Labs, you sign off your rights. American universities, the same. In Sweden, we have this little bit complicated system. If I can see benefits and drawbacks with both systems. I don't say one is better than the other, but we need to handle it. I think that is the question.
And Marie, in terms of getting scientists, producing scientists to address climate change, the issue of the day and our lives, how can we best foster a new cohort of scientists?
I think that's the million-dollar question, right? So what do we need? You know, what sort of people, what sort of scientists do we need for the future? I think at its core, we need science that is useful. So science, as scientists, we have a huge responsibility to answer unanswered questions, to identify interesting questions and to find transparent and consistent and replicable ways of answering those questions. But I think climate change has really brought to the fore the importance of also answering questions that there is a demand for in society. So questions that respond to real problems and that, you know, resonate with politicians, with local decision makers, with national decision makers, with company decision makers. So I think, you know, in the future we really need scientists that have their ears open, that actively participate in networks, that have their sort of ear to the ground in terms of understanding what problem am I supporting a solution to, you know, what real problem am I addressing. I think what you mentioned earlier, Tobias, in terms of co-benefits, I think to me that's really the golden nugget. Understanding, quantifying, providing the evidence for these types of co-benefits so that you don't only make, you know, the climate change argument for a climate mitigation action, but also the health argument. I think that's what's needed also in terms of getting, you know, broader and longer and more permanent political buy-in. For instance, you need the evidence to appeal to the voters that will get you re-elected. So coming at the problem from different angles.
And then, Tobias, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I can just add on. I think there is a great interest among many, many young colleagues from many different disciplines in climate change, and they want to get involved in it from a scientific perspective, educate themselves and others, and they're setting up journal clubs to read about what are the health effects, for example, at Karolinska from climate change. And then I think it's so important that we have a lot of evidence what it's needed. And as you said also, Sweden has led the way for a long time. Since 1990, we reduced our CO2 emissions by 39%, but now it's dangerous. The curve in Sweden in the coming years is turning in the wrong direction. We will get more CO2 emissions if we now take the policies that have been decided last year. And that's dangerous because then many of the young might say, look, we know what's needed, but if not even a rich country like Sweden can take the right steps, what is happening? So I think it's very important that we now really get the policies that's needed, that we show we can lead the way, and then that we work with many, many other countries. I think that's so important. We cannot just halt, because we work with many other countries, and they say, wait a minute, what's happening in Sweden now? Is this not a serious issue for you? You need to walk the talk. I think that's so important if we want to continue this.
But are you talking about like making sure that the education system is geared towards addressing the right problems at the...
I think a lot in the education system is getting there, but then if we teach our students about climate change and what's needed, then we also need to see that the political decisions, they're following the evidence. If we teach this is important, we need to move now, and then CO2 emissions, they go up in Sweden, what will happen? And that will be a big, big problem, I think.
Yeah. And then, so I think Sweden is known for doing pretty well when it comes to having a dialogue, public-private sector dialogues about educating for the jobs of the future, and also reskilling or upskilling jobs that get displaced by whatever, climate change, AI, new technologies. But is there another way are there better ways to have that dialogue? I mean, given that the STEM program strategy that you mentioned in your remarks, Minister, is from preschool to PhD. I mean, these are long timelines. How are there better ways to have the dialogue so you can say, oh, we need to pivot, and like, you can't change course. I mean, you have to put investment like that quickly. You have to invest a lot in the professors you have and the research facilities. Like, how would this best work?
I mean, it's a strategy, and the strategy has a long part component and a short-term aspect. And I mean, the long term, it's a matter of heavily investing in the STEM subjects, in engineering programs, in order to, in each cohort, if we can increase the percentage points in each cohort by 3 or 4 percentage points, that will mean thousands of people every year that will choose subjects that will be in the green transition and digital transition. But that's long-term investments that will take time to change. In the short term, I think it's a matter of reskilling. People who already have a job, already have an education, the possibility to have access to the education system in order to educate to the new innovative sectors in the economy. That can be at universities, but it can also be vocational training. There are different aspects of this, but I think if you want to be a bit more pragmatic in the short-term perspective, I think it's very much a question of reskilling the workforce. And in the Swedish context, we have several initiatives taking place right now. For example, in the vocational training, it's a big investment in what we call yrkeshögskolan. But also the possibility to the new scheme regarding reskilling for individuals in the workforce. So there is a lot of opportunities right now. I think it's a matter of grasping them, actually.
And then changing up a little bit, one of the things that's popping up everywhere in our lives, and we talked about it here this morning as well, with 76 elections coming up this year. The part of the job of education and science is to get like the scientific facts out there in a period of time where misinformation and misinformation is like rampant in our public lives. What can the education system do to address that, both like while you have students in school and then beyond?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to talk about it in the education system. And I think the election in Taiwan was actually to some extent on a positive note, because there was a lot of false information, a lot of AI components in the media trying to affect the election. But the citizens in Taiwan was not affected at all. At least not. I mean, if you look at the result, it seems like it didn't have an effect at least. So I think that was up to. There was a big debate about the phenomenon, and if you talk about something, then people will realize and know that there is a lot of false information going on. So I think, to have the debate and discussion, not at least in the education system, I think that's really, really important.
Yes, Marie?
If I could just add, I think it's super important also just to recognize that when it comes to misinformation and fake news and fake facts, young people are extremely vulnerable today, and that's purely or largely because of digitalization and the extreme exposure that they have to information and uncredited or not fact-checked information. And as adults and as parents, we're often lagging behind. We're an hour or 10 hours or 10 years behind. So important, like you say, Minister, to have that conversation, but also as adults to recognize our importance of being there and present and really leading the way in that continual source criticism, which I think goes from preschool to PhD. So important.
Tobias, you...
Yeah, and I think, again, there we can look back at the pandemic, where we saw a lot of misinformation regarding vaccines, regarding what to do, and the importance of having an open society where we can have discussions about this and show, yes, vaccines are effective, this is something important, and take that debate. And I think that's the same to climate change, because now I would say 99.99% of all researchers, they're clear. We have something called climate change, but it's still a tiny, tiny fraction, quite vocal. They're saying no, we don't know anything about this, we don't need to act. And if that's getting too big, that's dangerous. It's important with the open debate, but it's important also to say, science is here, we know this, now we need to act. And then I think it's very important that we actually act on the science. And we don't just say, yeah, we know the science, but we don't act. So we need to walk the talk and get action.
Yeah, that's more difficult, but you have to have the dialogue, but important science is fact-based. And
one minor comment. What I see as a trend among scientists in general, and this is something that we favor a lot in the WISE program, and that is to encourage popular science reports. I see many of the particularly young scientists spend a lot of time trying to convert their science. Of course, we are always celebrating our scientific results when they are published in Nature or in AAS, the American Association for Science, in the Science magazine. But we are equally much celebrating when we are reporting also on the popular science. So this will be a way to take our scientific results and make it accessible and also more easy for the public domain to judge if this is fake or true science. So that is, I see it's a driving force that's coming, and we are promoting it, of course, a lot from our side.
And it can be like an sort of inspirational wow factor for lay people when they read it.
Exactly, and we have a very active homepage. I know all organizations are very active, and I'm not a big fan of social media. Now I am. Because I see it as a tremendous tool to reach out, and we get a lot of responses all over the world, and also enthusiasm from young ones that want to be recruited to our programs. So it's, yeah.
And so thinking on the line of recruiting people to scientific programs and across for this question for all of you, what strategies do you have proven effective in motivating and empowering younger generations to get engaged? How do you capture their interest? Tobias, you talked a little bit about this already, but
and first important, I think it's now we're not yet young any longer, any of us. It's really to ask the young, the colleagues, the future colleagues, what is motivating you? And I think there again, many of the students I work with and teach is that they want to have an impact. They want to make a difference. And they see climate change as a major issue now. And this is affecting all of us, and it will just be worse and worse with the trajectories we have. And they are very motivated. And now we need to show what's your role in this system. Not just that, okay, that's nice that you do this, but get them involved. When we set up and plan research, have them there from the beginning. When we have educational activities, involve how do you want to get this education done? And then that we get, again, concrete action. This is not just talking. It's great that we meet here, but it's then, at the end of the day, it's the CO2 emissions. How much? That will lead to an increased temperature, or if we can slope and get the curve in the right direction. And if the younger generation see that it doesn't matter what they do, it doesn't matter what we say, we don't get action. I think that's very, very dangerous. So I really think we need to get out from here and get into action, all of us, within the different disciplines, and then much more between the disciplines. I think many researchers, I really think it's important to get more engineers, but they also want to work with social science, with health science and others, that we get better. And for me as a medical scientist, it's much easier to work with my own colleagues. I know the talk, I understand what to write. When I sit down with environmental scientists, social scientists, engineers, it's much more complex. But at the end of the day, I think we can make a bigger difference, and it's also more fun.
Well, that's a good life lesson, I think, generally when it comes to education. When you're talking with people in the know in whatever field you're in, you use one set of language. Like my background is Beltwayese, but you can't use that language outside of the Washington environment because you don't know what those acronyms mean. They're helpful when you're having a conversation with colleagues, but if you're trying to educate the public or a policymaker in a field where they're not an expert, you have to popularize it. With that. Any other ideas for best strategies for getting youth engaged?
Just one. Sorry. So when we ask all the scientists in our WISE program, when they are recruiting from all over the world, sustainability is one of the main reasons why they are looking at the programs in Sweden today. We are considered as a country, a small country, aggressive and forward-leaning when it comes to sustainability. And when they ask them, what is the prime reason looking for this program? We want to come to a country and to a program tackling sustainability, even though they're focusing on physics, chemistry, and material science. So this is an asset I can see of our country and also the other countries targeting sustainability. We simply invite and we get the best brains to our science thanks to sustainability. It's obvious today when we recruit.
That's good. Yeah. Good news.
Yeah. May I just add one more dimension? I think from the Swedish perspective, I think the biggest problem is that the Swedish elementary school is not good enough. So there's not enough kids who have the possibility to even go to university in the first step, in the second stage to take their PhD. I mean, 16 or 17% are not don't have the right to go to high school, for example. Don't have the grades to go to high school. So we see now in the really low ages, 10-year-old kids, 1/3 can't read, 1/4 can't calculate, stuff like that. So we have tremendous challenges in the Swedish system. So many kids who doesn't even know the basics, so to speak, to read, calculate, and to write. So we have a really long journey ahead of us in order to fulfill our potential. Because if we want to have more kids taking their PhD, and also from many different backgrounds, with more diversity, then we really need to have an elementary school where more kids know the basics, so to speak. And that's probably the biggest investment we can do in a long-term perspective.
Great, thank you for that. We have a minute left, and we could clearly talk much longer about this, but if I could just ask each of you, so there are academics in the room, business people in the room, policymakers in the room. So from your perspective, what's like a quick one thing, an action that we could take that would help make sure that we educate, like whether it's in our personal lives or in our professional lives, to make sure we have the scientists to address climate change now and in the future. So any ideas?
One part that is missing to bringing new science into business is also to make sure that the business models are out there for sustainability. It comes to circularity, new energy technology. So don't underestimate there needs to be a business model. And this is nothing that the policymakers or politicians can make alone, nor the industry. So that's where we need really to come together to derive the new business models.
And for me, it would be, if we want to solve climate change, we need policymakers, we need academia, we need the business and civil society together. And we need to see that we now have the science, we need more science, but we need to get the science into action. Most important, we cannot wait.
Thank you. Marie?
So apart from that, I mean, science that is useful and science that is understood. So we all have a responsibility to make sure that science is not perceived as something, ivory tower, science for science, but science that is pop science that is useful, science that makes sense.
Thank you. And last word?
Collaboration.
Collaboration. Perfect. I think that's a good word to end on. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and act on the science was one of the key takeaways here, and also Sweden being small and smart. And before we break for lunch, I would like to be joined up here by Peter again. So Peter, where did you go? We need you back on stage. And also Ibrahim Naji, Chief Commercial Officer for Techarenan, because you, the two of you, have some great news and some information to give us. Something is happening in Stockholm on February 22nd and 23rd.
Correct.
So, and there will be some sort of really prominent people.
Yes.
Yeah, so tell us.
Yeah, so what's happening with the Tech Arena?
Absolutely. So the Tech Arena is the largest tech and innovation conference in Scandinavia. Was founded back in 2014 as a very small startup competition where we hosted around 20 attendees that first year. But the same overarching mission has always been the same, and that's how do we facilitate and sort of accelerate innovation and collaboration between different stakeholders in the industry. And sort of just considering that Sweden is, I believe, we're the second largest exporters of unicorns per capita in the world, and considering the infrastructure that we built in Sweden, considering the culture that we built in Sweden that has allowed companies to really flourish beyond belief, there really hasn't been a platform or an arena that sort of matches that output of innovation and world-class entrepreneurship. Until now, of course. So between the 22nd and the 23rd of February, the largest tech and innovation conference in Scandinavia will be taking place in Friends Arena, where we will be gathering 8,000 attendees, entrepreneurs, executives, venture capital firms, family offices, and of course politicians. Esteemed guests include Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple, the former vice president of the US, Al Gore, and of course our very own prime minister. And of course we have over 30 partners behind this initiative, from the Swedish Innovation Agency to Uber, Tesla, MasterCard. So I do invite you all to attend the event. I'll be around, of course, during lunch. So if you guys have any questions, ideas, thoughts, I'd be more than happy to explore synergies and answer any questions.
Thank you, Ibrahim. We're going to be there because, as we all know, you can't do the green transition without tech. Yes. So it's really important for our members, and also we're looking forward, of course, to hearing from Steve Wozniak and Al Gore, who really sort of helped elevate the conversation on the climate crisis.
Absolutely. I look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibrahim. Thank you. Now I'm standing here between you and some nice wraps, and the wraps will be served outside, and also outside, which you probably saw when we had coffee, you can visit, you can interact and mingle, of course, and you can visit the different setups out there. You can visit the Hyper Island virtual reality program, so do that, and also the other partners of our Bright Green Summit event here today. We will be back at 1:00 p.m. and continue the rest of the afternoon. Anything else I should say, Peter, or
I think you've covered it.
Yeah?
So let's go out and make things happen over
Yeah?
lunch.
Have something to eat, and we will be back by 1 p.m.
Thank you.